I'd like to start out by saying that, while I am interested in the paranormal, I tend to be pretty skeptical and prefer to think things out rationally before dismissing every little thing as ghosts or the like. This experience, however, has no logical explanation I can think of. I'm pretty new here as well, and I apologize in advance if I'm not doing this right. So yeah, here we go. I was 17 and it was mid-October, nearing Halloween. My family and I had gone to a really small, fairly rural town to meet a group of family friends for dinner and catching up for old time's sake, as my siblings and I had grown up with the children of the other families. After dinner, the parents stayed at the bar drinking, and those of us that weren't of legal drinking age were starting to get a little bored. That's when one of my friends brought up the cemetery. Apparently, there's a cemetery in this town that's said to be haunted. I think some ghost hunter, paranormal type show did an episode about it or something, but the legends are said to have been around since before that. The story goes that a group of teenage boys wandered into the graveyard one Halloween night with the intention of causing trouble and maybe stirring up some spooky ghost action in celebration of Halloween. After digging around for a while with no unexplained phenomena, they decided to sit on top of this mausoleum, which is basically just a big tomb built up around a coffin instead of actually burying it in the ground. They were about to call it quits and head home when all of a sudden, unseen hands seemed to push one of the boys off the top of the tomb and onto the ground. All the boys are obviously scared shitless and hightail it out of there. All of them describe feeling an eerie, ominous energy following them around for weeks after the incident. There have also been numerous reports of orbs, headstones inexplicably moving or disappearing, ghostly apparitions, inscriptions being changed, flashes of lights, strange noises, the whole works. We arrived at the cemetery well after dark, and one of my girlfriends, we'll call her Emma, and I were the only two brave enough to go in. We hopped out of the car, careful to be as inconspicuous as we could since we didn't want the police showing up and ruining our ghost hunting experience, and headed towards the entrance. It was chilly and a bit windy, as autumn in Wisconsin tends to be. We gripped each other's hands and started down the gravel path. As soon as we passed the fence that surrounded the plot of land, everything seemed to get very still and quiet. We couldn't even hear the wind anymore, which was strange as it had definitely been breezy as we got out of the car. It was so silent that even whispering and our steps in the gravel seemed, pun absolutely intended, loud enough to wake the dead. Though there were no lights in or near the cemetery, there was enough moonlight filtering through the clouds to allow us to see pretty well. We soon realized we had no idea where the fabled haunted mausoleum was, but we kept walking anyway. We made a random left turn and, lo and behold, there it was, about 30 yards in front of us. Pretty good luck, right? As we approached, I began to feel almost an electric sort of energy in my fingers and hands, but I wrote this off as just nerves or something due to breaking the law. We reached the tomb, and this thing is huge. It was twice my height and at least made of weathered gray stone with moss growing sparsely on it. We stare for a moment and Emma whispers, "You should touch it." Being the badass ghost hunter I am, I oblige. There's nothing really remarkable about the cool roughness of the stone, so I decided to take it a step further and hop up to sit on the lip of the curved top of the thing. Again, nothing happens, so I jokingly shout, "If there's anyone here, any spirits or anything, come on out." After listening in silence for a second, I think, fuck it, and make my way to the very top where that kid is rumored to have been pushed off by ghostly hands. I have Emma snap a photo or two before climbing back down. Slightly disappointed by the lack of spooky encounters, we agree to head out and are about to do just that when we see a pair of headlights slowly creeping down the road that borders one side of the graveyard. We immediately assumed someone noticed us and called the cops, so we crouched down behind some bushes with the mausoleum directly to our left to hide. Both of us are completely silent except our breathing as we watch the vehicle slowly make its way down the street. I'm watching its taillights turn the corner when I hear a low, creepy, menacing laugh coming from my back right. It sounded so strange, like it was a few feet away, but also right in my ear. I'm freaked out, and I'm about to chalk it up to some kind of adrenaline-induced hallucination when Emma, who is standing to my left, whispers, "Hey, did you hear that?" My blood ran cold as I slowly nod a silent yes I did. I cautiously turned my head to the direction I heard it come from and, I shit you not, see a dark figure stand up from one of the headstones not 10 feet away from us. I scream bloody murder and somehow end up on the ground as the next thing I know, Emma is pulling at my arm shouting, "We have to run, we have to get out of here. Come on, we have to go." I let her pull me to my feet and led me blindly by the hand. We're full out sprinting, tripping over gravestones and plants and who knows what else in the dark, and we can't even find the exit in our panic. We finally reach a gap in the fence, and I can feel tears streaming down my face as I run for my life down the middle of the road, not even paying attention to the oncoming headlights until I nearly run into them. Luckily, it was the car containing the rest of our friends, and we rip the door open and throw ourselves inside screaming, "Go, go, please just drive," before we even bothered to sit in an actual seat or shut the door. I can't remember who was driving, but I think our panic and terror shook them enough that they did what was asked of them and sped away back to the bar. They kept asking us what happened and if we were okay, but we couldn't calm down enough to answer until we were back inside the bar and sat down. Still shaking and out of breath, we recounted our story to all of them, drunk parents included. I think a lot of them were pretty skeptical, and honestly, I would have been too if I hadn't experienced it myself. In the weeks that followed, I felt that same eerie energy the boys in the legend described hanging over my head. Personally, I attribute it more to paranoia after being scared out of my mind by something I couldn't actually see than some kind of curse, but it made me uneasy nonetheless. It's been a few years since this happened, and I still cannot think of a single logical explanation for what happened that night. While I have no idea how credible anyone else's reported experience with this place are, I know we were without a doubt the only people in that graveyard, or even on the streets for that matter, and we would have heard someone trying to sneak up on us. This sound of that laugh was so unnatural too. I can't get it out of my head, even now. I've never even been more scared than what I was that night. And I know now that people mean when they talk about not being able to fully believe in the paranormal until you've experienced it firsthand. Anyway, just thought I'd share this experience with you guys, as it was my first and most memorable ghost experience. This could have not happened at a better time. The year was 2009, about a week before Halloween. My sisters and I got a call that our grandmother's health had taken a turn for the worst, and that the doctors were calling the family in. My grandmother was in the LaGrange hospital, and we were in New Nan. It would take us 30 to 45 minutes to get there. Each of us 4 girls took off from work, and we all met at my house, where we would ride together to the hospital. Being in such a hurry, neither of us took the time to use the bathroom, so by the time we got to the hospital, me and my baby sister were about to burst. We got parked and Kelly, my baby sister, and I ran into the hospital looking for a bathroom. The entrance that we took, we had to walk through double doors and turn slightly to our right, then slightly to our left before heading down a long corridor. The corridor led us to a gift shop that sat on the right. Just before the gift shop, there were 2 small bathrooms, one for men and one for women, to the left of the hall. My sister and I were racing to the bathrooms when we saw an elderly woman in front of us. She was about 25 feet away from us. She was stooped over a tad and wore an old, outdated black coat and an old black hat with a flower attached to the side of the hat. It was not cold enough outside to wear a coat. The old woman entered the bathroom, and my sister and I raced in after her. The bathroom was so small that it only had 2 stalls and 1 sink, and 3 people would be considered a crowd. My sister beat me to the second stall, after she saw the old woman enter the first stall and heard her lock the stall. My sister and I were laughing at each other, and we were talking to each other while my sister was in the stall. I was play fussing at her for beating me to the only available stall. So here I was standing outside the first stall, waiting for the old woman to come out. All of a sudden, the door to the first stall slowly creaked open, and I stepped to the side so that the old woman could get out. Told you the bathroom was very small. After a few seconds, no one came out, and I peeked around and pushed the door open a little bit more. I was scared that I may find the poor old lady sitting on the toilet, and she had let the door come open on her or something, and we would both have an awkward moment. I looked into the stall, and no one is there. My sister was still in the second stall, and I said, "Kelly, wasn't that old woman in this other stall?" My sister replied with a yes and why. I said, "Kelly, she's not here." Kelly asked, "What do you mean she's not in there? I saw her go in." And I replied with, "Well, she has either gone down the toilet or she has disappeared." I remember Kelly asking me, did I see her go out? And I said, Kelly, she would have had to bump into me to get out, and no, she did not go past me. The conversation went on like this for a few more seconds, ending with my sister coming out of the second stall, fast as lightning, with her pants half buttoned. Flying towards the door, she turned to me and asked if I was coming, and I responded that I have business to take care of. Of course, my sister left me there alone while I took care of business in the first stall. I was either feeling brave or stupid that day. After I came out of the bathroom, my sister was waiting by the gift shop. We knew we just had a ghostly encounter. Retelling the story to the rest of our family members had them thinking we were off our rocker. I retold the story again to the nurse, who was assigned to my grandmother, and she confirmed that there had been several ghost sightings in the hospital. One day, I had an appointment at Clark at noon. I finished the meeting with my client early, and being near Orchard Road, I went shopping. By the evening, I got ready to go back to the flat. The same flat which is in my story, an invisible housemate. I was filled with dread due to the previous experiences there, and as I boarded the train for NS from Orchard Station, my friend Louise called me on my cell phone. We talked for a while, and she invited me over for a movie and dinner at her house. As we were longtime childhood friends, I was delighted to spend some time with her, and with that, I changed the train. Earlier, I was going in the opposite direction in the NS line, and now I boarded the train to Semabwag on the same NS line. I reached Toapeo station, and loads of people rushed to catch a seat. While the train started, I could see from the window a middle-aged woman standing at the platform, just looking inside the compartment. She was wearing a kemba, kind of a bluish-grayish-white clothing. She had unkempt but jet-black hair. I kept on staring at her because she looked pale white, as if she had severe anemia. I think her face looked almost the same as her blouse. I kept staring at her, as I thought it was very unusual for any woman to be so pale. And then the train sped away, and I got back to playing Subway Surf on my cell phone. I was distracted by the people getting up to get out at Bishan Station. As the train halted, I saw the same woman on the platform. I got shocked as I clearly saw her on Toapeo platform, and she was here again at Bishan at the speed of the train. It was highly unlikely that she reached Bishan Station so fast, and I kept looking at her. But she just stood on the platform without fidgeting when people passed her by. The train doors closed, and she didn't board the train again. And I wondered why she traveled from Toapeo to Bishan without any intention to board the train and just stand at the platform. I kept staring at her. She was still standing at the platform, from the window, and the train started in full swing.
I again went back to another game of Subway Surf when the lady sitting right next to me elbowed me while opening her purse. I looked at her and she apologized, but that's when I looked towards the right side of the compartment, and to my surprise, the pale woman was standing inside the compartment, near the door. Now, at this moment, I still can't explain to myself how that woman defied the laws of physics, as last time I saw her, she was outside on the platform. The train doors are obviously closed shut before the train starts to speed away. Then how on earth is it possible for her to board the train? And she was clearly standing outside on the platform and no way in the train. And I could see her outside, except when she disappeared from my view, from the window's edge, while I sat there in total shock, rethinking what I am seeing. I still kept staring at her. The passengers near her seemed indifferent about her presence, and she had the same expression throughout the time she was standing there. And her hair, which seemed unkempt from the front, was nicely tied in a loose hanging bun, which came until the center of her shoulder blades at the back. But from the thickness of her hair bun, it seemed like she had long hair. Except for when she caught me staring at her, she moved her head to left to look at me. Her movement seemed as if someone was turning a puppet's head on its neck. At that time, when our eyes interlocked, I felt the dread that I have never ever felt in my entire existence. Her eyes' color were the lightest shades of gray. It was like the meanest of all the eyes I had ever come in contact with. I was filled with the emotions of grief, or something on the lines of envy. I lowered my eyes and fixed it on my cell phone and tried to refocus my mind. But I kept looking at her dress's bottom, and then another electric shock ran through my body. I couldn't even see her feet. Normally, someone who's wearing a kabaya, you can see their feet. But it seemed she didn't have any feet at all. And then the train halted at Ongmo Kyo Station. I managed to look up to find out whether the incoming passengers can see her or not. And as I looked up, she already left. She was gone. It looked like a nanosecond for her to disappear, even before the train doors had opened. At that moment, realizing that it's impossible to get out without the train doors opening, and that she vanished in the moment, I rolled my eyes up to look at her. I just froze in terror. I looked around to see if anyone else also saw that or not, but nobody seemed to be influenced by the woman. Or maybe they couldn't see her. At this point, I was horribly scared. This was the second incident for me in which something, in this case someone, vanished in thin air. Though I didn't see her vanish, but she was there at one moment, and like a microsecond later, she wasn't there. It wasn't even humanly possible to get out of the train or get into the train in that moment. So I put on my headphones and music and closed my eyes shut so as to not see anything else. I got out at Semabwag Station. At first, she joked that I rode with a Pontiac, and I gave her a smack on her arm. A Pontiac is a bloodthirsty ghost of a woman, and quite popular ghost in Southeast Asia. But after calming me down and realizing that I was actually frightened to my core, she told me that the pale woman could be the white ghost of Angmo Kyo MRT station. And when I checked it on the internet, I found out that almost all the stations I crossed today on my way to Semabwag are supposedly haunted, and yes, White Woman is one of them. It was rather amusing, as how can ghosts haunt a train and station for that matter, but it was written that white ghosts targets lonely people. But I was in a filled compartment, so why did I only see her?
Paranormal is a part of everyone's life, but not everyone noticed it. My first encounter was around 18 years ago, when I was 10. It was Christmas morning when I lost my father. It was a devastating loss for all of us. Since then, I don't want to celebrate Christmas. Anyway, let's get to the point. The day after the funeral, I was sitting in my room. I was bummed. I didn't want to accept the truth. And then it happened. I heard my father's voice, calling my name not once, not twice, but 3 times. I couldn't believe my ears, and I raced out of my room into the kitchen. My eyes were starting to water because I didn't see him. I started to cry and headed back into my room. Then I realized that it was very bright winter's day. I mean, it was freaking December 26th, and then I saw him. My dad was standing before me, smiling, surrounded by that light. I stared at him for what seemed to be hours. Then suddenly, light started to flicker, and I heard him talking directly to me. He said to me, "I'm sorry. Be good. I have to go now. Goodbye." And then he disappeared with the light. That was the last memory I had of him. The next experience was 4 years ago, when I was in my neighbor's house. My neighbor, let's call her Z, lived with her father, let's call him A, who by the way was a creepy guy. However, Z was gifted. She could see the future through cards. I was stunned when she told me things known only by me. I went there often times, but every time I took even the slightest look to A, my head started to hurt like hell. When I shared that to Z, she told me that I was sensitive. Every time, when I get a headache, I was in a way cleansing the negative energy. I shook it off because that couldn't be true. After the seance, you know the cards. She told me that I have a big hole in my heart, a hole full of pain and sorrow. She started to cry and told me that soon, very soon, I will lose someone very close to me, and I needed to be strong at that moment. After that, I stopped going there, and a week later, she died, leaving behind her awful father. I know it's a terrible thing to say, but he was evil. I can't explain how I know. I just do. 10 days after Z's death, A got ill and died. I know my stories aren't as exciting as the others, but they are true. Just letting you know that the person who I was supposed to lose was my mother, who died a year after Z and A. You may say it's a coincidence, but it's not. Every time I pass Z's house, I get the same headache, and I get the feeling that someone is watching me through the second floor windows where A lived. I'm 28 now, and I still get that feeling. About 20 years ago, when we lived in Navy housing on Oahu, Hawaii, my daughter and I experienced something that still haunts me. Honestly, I'm not sure what it was, and that I'm not sure if it was a ghost. At the time, we, my husband, our 2 daughters and I were living in Navy housing. I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural, and we didn't entertain such stories or thoughts in our home. It was a summer sunny day. My husband was at work, my oldest daughter was out surfing with her friend, and my youngest was at home with me. We had just finished lunch and decided to watch some TV. The TV room was just off the living room, dining room, and filled with windows and 2 doors, one to the kitchen and one to the backyard. There was a wall composed of 2 large sliding doors that separated the living and dining room from the TV room. Against that makeshift sliding door wall was a love seat that my daughter was sitting on. I was sitting on a chair opposite the love seat. The TV was to the side of us, on a low bookcase below a bank of windows. While sitting there watching TV, something shimmery, a staticky, sparkly, flashing sort of mass passed between us and the TV. It had entered from the living room into the TV room and then moved across the room and out the back door. Within seconds of seeing it, we turned to look at each other. She then jumped into my lap, and we sat hugging each other tightly for a bit before either of us could speak. I knew by her actions and the panic on her face, she had seen what I had. With fear in her voice, she asked me, "What was that?" I had no idea what it was, but I tried to reason it away. Staying as calm as I could, I told her it was probably the sun reflecting off a car passing the house. With a trembling, soft voice, almost a whisper, she replied, "But all the blinds are down." Not wanting to give in to the panic, I told her that the shades don't fit the window so tightly that light can't find its way in between window frame and shade. I then changed the subject to picking up my oldest daughter and going for shaved ice, a Hawaiian snow cone, but better. Other than telling family and friends for the next few weeks, we didn't and haven't talked about it since. We put it behind us. Fast forward 2 years later, my husband, reassigned back to Rhode Island, had moved back to the mainland to open our old home and get it ready while the girls and I were still in Hawaii. The girls still had a few months of school to finish, so he went ahead without us. The last few days on the island, I spent alone, cleaning our base housing. All our household belongings had been moved out the day before, and we were on our way back to Rhode Island. While I cleaned the house, readying it for inspection, my girls enjoyed their last few days with friends on the beach. I had cleaned the kitchen and laundry the day before and was now cleaning the bedrooms, bathrooms, and on into the living room and dining room. The whole house was floored with floor covering, which I had to sweep and mop spotless. I was mopping the living room and dining room area. The only thought in my mind was how warm it was now that the air conditioner was gone. Then, out of nowhere, appeared that same shimmering, sparkling, wild flashing mass. It crossed the room right in front of me. Being all alone and startled by what I was seeing, I packed up and left. I still hadn't mopped the TV room, nor finished the living or dining room. I didn't care. I was out of there. I grabbed my cleaning supplies, my purse, and locked the door. I left the mop and bucket with the curbside trash and got in the car and didn't look back. I have never ever seen anything like this before or after Hawaii. I've also since become more open-minded to ghosts. Once back in Rhode Island, I started watching the many supernatural and ghost hunting shows that had since started appearing on TV, and although I am open-minded now, I haven't seen any real proof. I say that because I'm still not sure what I saw in Hawaii. I still feel like there might have been a logical explanation. I'm still waiting to come across someone, somewhere, who has experienced the same thing. Someone who can tell me what it was that my daughter and I saw.
I'm an amateur UFO researcher. I say amateur, but I think some might consider me an expert in the field. Anyway, I'm writing here to record what's already occurred. I'm too afraid to post on the forums I usually frequent when discussing my findings because I really don't need the extra attention right now. I'm afraid that something is going to happen, and I have to document it somewhere. So here it is, and I hope you enjoy my story. I know what you're all thinking, no doubt. I'm probably some nutjob that sees airplanes flying at night and thinks they're aliens, and I can respect that train of thought. My purpose here isn't to get people to believe, it's purely selfish. Now, I'm not really in fear for my life. Well, I am, but that's not why I'm writing this. It's my research I'm concerned about. All my years looking into extraterrestrial life, I've had a number of experiences, some more notable than others. I've seen orbs in the sky maneuver in ways aircrafts never could, and I've picked up radio waves with no point of origin on Earth. Those types of things I've looked into, but no real proof has ever come out of it. But what happened the other day changed all that. I live out in California, pretty much the middle of nowhere, out in the desert. Gotta be close to the action, you know? At night, I routinely go out in my pickup and see if I can get a glimpse of anything. I've numerous outposts I go to where I've had experiences and where I know people have known to have seen UFOs. I was at one such place, sitting in my truck in the absolute darkness of the desert, sipping my coffee, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a bright light streak up into the sky, like really bright. It was coming from the middle of a rock plateau in the distance. Naturally, I revved up the engine and headed over. I parked about a quarter mile away and walked the rest. I didn't want the noise to scare off whatever it was, so I snuck up and wormed my way in between the rocks to get to the middle where the light was coming from. I peeked in, and in an instant, everything I've ever believed was validated. I saw two creatures, pretty short but humanoid, no doubt. They had big eyes with no pupils, pure white, and I could see that their flesh was moist and scaly. I could hear them speak to one another. Their language is difficult to describe. I can't really put into words what it sounded like. It was high-pitched and echoed, though that was more their voices and not the language itself. Hearing an alien language sent chills up my spine. I was so excited. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. There were two pods behind them, and they were both standing around some sort of metallic rod stuck in the sand. That's where the light was coming from. It was shooting out the top, like some sort of beacon. I assume it was transmitting back to the mothership, but I don't really know. To me, it appeared to be sucking something out of the earth. I could hear the device humming. I inched closer for a better look, but I cracked the rock, and they both turned to me in unison. I froze. Their eyes cut through me, and my excitement turned to terror. I was so scared, but in that same moment, I could see in them the same thing: fear. One of them reached out and touched something on the rod, and the light exploded out, blinding me for a moment. As my eyes adjusted back to normal, all I saw were the two pods jet straight back up into the air. There was no noise made, only the sound of the sphere ripping through the air. Now, as much as I'd like you people to believe what I've just told you, that's not really my concern, because when they left, lying on the ground was the rod. They'd forgotten it or dropped it. I don't know. All that matters is that I have it. Actual proof of intelligent life, and if you looked at this thing, held it in your hand, you know it came from another world. I mean, with how bright the light on top can get, there's nothing on Earth that could power something like that. You'd think I'd be on top of the world, and believe me, I was, until the next day. I woke up to a knock on my door. It was early that afternoon, but naturally I was sleeping in. The knocking was persistent. It didn't stop, just a slow-paced knock, over and over, until I finally got to the door. I opened it to see two large men standing in front of me. They were both bald and pale, with no eyebrows or eyelashes, and they were wearing crisp black suits. Everything from their ties to their shoes appeared to be brand new, like it was the first time they'd been worn. The man on the left was the only one who spoke. He introduced himself as Agent Quinn and his associate as Agent Reed. Then he addressed me by name, my full name. I didn't think it was odd at first. I mean, he was at my house. I'd buy he knew who I was. But then he asked me the question that almost made my blood freeze. Where's the rod you procured last night? There was no emotion in his words at all, almost robotic in tone. I immediately looked at both their sides and noticed they didn't have guns. I thought it was strange for government agents not to carry weapons, but I was also sort of relieved. I denied knowing anything, saying I'd been at home all night. Agent Quinn, however, didn't seem to have any interest in talking about whether or not I had what he wanted. As far as he was concerned, I had it. It is your best interest if you simply oblige us and gave us the item we have come for. I can assure you it would make life much easier for you. But I stuck to my guns and told them to leave. I stood firm and raised my voice, getting upset with them. But when I said leave, Agent Reed reached out his hand and grabbed me by the arm. Now, I'm not a strong man. I don't work out or anything like that, but the strength in his grip was inhuman. I've no doubt about that. He held me in place while Agent Quinn got in my face, our noses almost touching. I was staring in his eyes, and I could see how lifeless they were, like what made him human had been stripped away. It is unfortunate that you have chosen to lie to us, he said. My sincerest hope is that you will reconsider, and soon. Agent Reed then released me, and the two of them walked back to a black van that was parked out on the street. That was the other day. I'm freaking out. How could they know that I have it? How do they know about it in the first place? I've heard the stories, stuff similar to this, and I'm afraid of what's going to happen to me because I'm not going to compromise myself and give them what they want. I was smart enough the night before to hide the rod, but I'm hesitant to say where. But I do want to. I want someone other than me to know where it is, but I have no family or friends, so I've turned here. I'm not really looking for advice as to what to do, but I'm not adverse to it either. I only want to have what is happening to me be out there. I can't let them cover this up too. As long as they don't find these posts, I'll keep posting about what's happening. I need it documented. Alright, things have gotten pretty crazy. I'm not much of a drinker, but I've since took up the habit. I'm 2 drinks in as I write this. I appreciate the comments and advice I've been getting, but I don't really have any intention of handing the rod over. I've dedicated years and years to investigating UFOs and extraterrestrial life, so to finally have something and just hand it over just isn't an option for me. I left a good job paying and another life to come out here to chase my passion, and that's what I intend to do. After posting the other night, I waited a few hours until a little past midnight and decided to head back out to the rock plateau where I originally encountered the life forms. It had been a few days, and I wanted to get a second look at the site, but after the agents came to my door, my mind had been in a different place. But I refused to let fear change the way I live my life. I went out and crept out, got into my pickup, and headed towards the desert. I half expected to be followed, so I couldn't help but glancing back to my rearview mirrors the whole time. But it seemed I was alright. I got out into the desert, no problem, but as I got closer to the rock plateau, I could see it was illuminated. Not by some extraterrestrial technology, but like the lights you see when they're doing construction late at night on the highway. The entire thing was encased in what looked like a white quarantine tent. I parked quite a distance away and got out my pair of binoculars to take a closer look. The tent seemed to be surrounded by black vans, the same that I'd seen the agents leave in. There were men similar to the agents all around, no hair and in the same fine suits. I have no idea what they were doing, but I got extremely nervous as I watched them. Some were going in and out of the tent, while others stood motionless, as if they were on guard like statues. There was no way they could see me from the distance I was, so I decided that even though it wouldn't be that clear, given my range, I thought I'd record what was going on. I got my phone out and zoomed in as far as I could. It wasn't good enough to see what exactly they were doing, but I could see one thing that didn't show up in my binoculars. The eyes of every single person there were glowing, like some sort of bluish white, but I could see it very clearly through the screen. It sort of disturbed me, but I don't really know what it meant. Some of you have commented that you have thought that the agents were themselves aliens, and I didn't really think that until seeing that. Though I do also believe they work for the government, there's no way they would be able to churn out an operation like that without people having questions and them having the right answers. I have in the past heard some of the crazier UFO researchers make claims that our government has been working with extraterrestrials for as long back as the 50s, but I never put too much validity into those claims. Seeing this, however, made me question everything. Anyway, sorry, I got sidetracked again. I recorded them for about a half hour for no real reason other than I thought something more interesting might happen at any moment. You couldn't tell what they were doing at all, so it was a half hour of guys with glowing eyes walking around and standing. I would have just kept filming, but all of a sudden, I could see that 2 of the eyes had turned and were staring out into the distance towards me. I didn't think much of it, just that he had moved, but then slowly I noticed the same stationary eyes turned towards my direction. It wasn't long until, on my camera, it was a wall of eyes staring. I immediately jumped in my truck and peeled out of there. As I rushed home, I kept assuring myself it was nothing. There was no way they could have seen me. It was pitch black out there, and I was so far away. I assured myself something else had to have caught their attention. I got home and rushed inside. I just stared out the window for about a good hour, expecting a black van to show up or something along those lines, but nothing. I breathed a sigh of relief and opened up my laptop to transfer the footage from my phone. I hooked it all up and opened the file, and much to my dismay, the video was fuzzy. And not like a normal fuzzy video. This was like the black and white fuzz you'd see when the VHS tape stopped running, something I'd never see on digital video. To say I was pissed is an understatement. It had recorded so smooth, it makes no sense that it was corrupted like that. I was shaking. I was so angry, so I decided to get a drink to calm my nerves, and I just kept drinking till I woke up the next morning, or I guess afternoon, on my couch with a splitting headache and a bad taste in my mouth. I looked out the window, and sitting in front of my house was a black van. All the windows were tinted. I couldn't see anything. I was pretty scared, I'm not gonna lie to you, but I had things I had to take care of, and to do that I had to leave my house. I mustered up the courage and walked outside, or I suppose ran is more accurate. I wanted to get into my truck as quick as possible, but the moment I stepped outside, the van drove off. I was relieved, but I knew there had to be more to it, but I didn't have time to worry about it. I had things I needed to do, so after a few hours of running errands, I came back home to my door being wide open, pulled in my driveway, and took a deep breath before heading in. The place was a mess. Furniture turned over and ripped up, books and knickknacks thrown about. I turned my couch back right side up and just sat on what was left of the cushions, looking at everything I owned, broken and beaten. I knew that they thought they'd find, and I knew it wasn't there, so they gave me a bit of relief. Then as I sat there, I remembered the rest of my research. I went back to my bedroom, and sure enough, everything had been tampered with. Cords had been yanked out of my computer, boxes of documents emptied out all over the floor. But as I looked at everything, I noticed nothing was missing. It was all there. They hadn't taken anything. I did notice, however, there was an envelope amongst the mess. I didn't have anything that I kept in an envelope, so I knew whatever it was, it must have been them who left it. I opened it up, and inside was just a single piece of paper, typed up. It said, "It has come to our attention that you are not only continuing to hinder our investigation by keeping what we desire from us, but that it appears that you have begun an investigation of your own. What you saw the other night was not for your eyes. To continue on this path you appear to be on would be unwise." Now I'm just sitting here, 3 drinks deep in what used to be a nice and tidy house, typing this, wondering what to do. I'm at a loss. I don't know how far they'll go. Right now, I think they're just trying to scare me into doing what they want. And since I know I'm not going to, I'm nervous as to what's coming next. I work night audit at this semi-swanky hotel next to the airport. One night, I get a call from a lady in 204. She says there was arguing, loud banging, and crying coming out of 206. Check the computer. No one has checked into that room due to maintenance issues. What the fuck? Called my supervisors to see what to do. She tells me to call on site security and follow them up with a key. I decide to be the bigger man and go up anyways. As we get off the elevator, we can hear the crying. It's loud. My heart starts racing as we near the door, so I hand the key to the security guard. The next 5 minutes seem to happen in slow motion. He opens the door and immediately flicks on the light. Keep in mind 206, we're on the 2nd floor, only door was by me, and this is at like 3 a.m. and there was no one around. As we enter the room, the shower is on, steam is coming from under the door. There is only one lamp on in the room. It's super cold, and there's a lady in red, lacy bra, black panties, with super red hair curled up crying in the bed. She was facing away from us. As Frank approached her, he asked if everything was okay. She sorta just stopped crying and rolled over. When she did, A wave of horror came over me. She was super pale, covered in blood, and was just staring behind us. That's when we realized the shower had stopped and the door was open. There was a man about 6'5" standing in the doorway. As we turned around, cops tased him and arrested him. Turns out he was a rapist who hides in hotel rooms, kidnaps women who stay there, and cuts them open. To this day, I will never go to a hotel again. I'm currently a janitor at a gym. We have a stairwell that leads down some stairs to a door that doesn't open because we lost the keys years ago. One night, there was a loud banging sound coming from the door. Sounded like someone was banging it every second for a couple minutes. I stood at the top of the stairs and listened and watched, and it stopped. It started up again a few minutes later. I went back up there to see, and it stopped again as soon as I got there. Told my manager the next day and had a locksmith come in. He got the door open, and it's just an old supply closet that's empty. Every so often, someone hears a banging sound coming from the door at the bottom of the stairs. Third shift gas station attendant. My first night alone. I'm out cleaning trash around the pumps and refilling the windshield fluid containers. Cop pulls in, drives by really slow, staring at the store, doesn't see me standing near pumps, parks, and walks into the store really fast. He's clearly looking for an attendant, so I walk into store. He jumps when the door opens and I say, "Hey, what's up?" The Dunkin' Donuts, 2 streets over, just got hit and the guy doesn't fit any profiles. We think he just likes to shoot people, so we're letting people know. He gets in his car and drives off. Was sitting at a desk in front of a good-sized window, reading a binder. Sort of had that feeling like someone was watching me, so I looked up, and there was a face pressed to the glass. No idea how long he was there before I looked up. Ran out to the foyer, where there was a glass door on the porch that should be locked. It wasn't. He started shaking the door trying to get in. Ran to the next room, and he just followed me around the house while I was on the phone with the cops, watching me through the windows. They didn't catch him. That night, he came back the next night. They caught him. Creepy as fuck. Surprise. Sometimes patients come in for other problems and don't mention that they sleepwalk. There have been a few occasions where I've been sitting in my office, watching vitals and writing reports, when I turn around to get something and a patient has sleepwalked into my office and is standing right behind me. At 2 a.m. in the dead quiet, that gives one quite a shock. Right out of college, I got a job as a nanny for 2 elementary school-aged girls. For their anniversary, the parents went on a week-long cruise, and I stayed home with the kids. The first few nights, the 8-year-old would come into my room multiple times a night and wake me up. It was obvious she hadn't pre-planned what she was going to give me as a reason for waking me up, so she would stumble through an excuse on the spot like, "I just wanted to make sure we are still going to the park tomorrow," or, "I think I forgot to brush my teeth and wondered if I should do it now or wait till the morning." I figured she was just missing her parents and feeling out of sorts, so I let it slide at first. But by the 4th or 5th time, knowing I needed sleep to keep up with 2 active kids, I told her that she wasn't to wake me up unless there was an actual emergency. I got a couple more hours of undisturbed sleep, but wake up with a weird feeling around 5 a.m. I turn over and nearly piss myself. The girl had brought over a chair right next to the bed and is staring down at me. It didn't help that she had long, dark hair, and this happened a few months after The Ring came out. Her explanation? "I just thought it would be fun to watch you sleep. I didn't wake you." Touché, kiddo. It was the summer of 1992. I was 20 years old, and I had just completed my junior year of college, and I was staying in the same city as the campus to take some summer classes. I also worked a couple of part-time jobs to handle living expenses. One of my jobs was as a fast food delivery guy. We cooked and delivered steaks, chicken, and burgers instead of the usual pizza or Asian food. One night after completing my shift, I was bored and for laughs, decided to check out an adult movie and novelty store that I had seen sometimes in the course of all my driving for that job. I parked amongst several other cars and got out of my car to go into the store. I saw a middle-aged man with a pasty appearance, with greasy dark hair and receding hairline in the car parked closest to the store. I approached the car on the way in, and he raised his hand hello to me. Not wanting to be rude, I raised my hand in return. As I walked directly by the driver's side door, he said hey, and I said hello. He leaned his head out of his window. He said, "You want to get it off?" I browsed about, and put off by the sheer seediness of the place, quickly left. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the guy in the car in a different parking space. I got into my car and started out of the parking lot. As I got to the road, I saw the guy start his car and start to come out as well. Hoping this was coincidence, I turned out of the parking lot to go home. It wasn't coincidence. Suddenly, this guy was following me very closely and blinking his high beams at me every few blocks. I tried to lose him at some traffic signals, but was unsuccessful. I decided to go an alternate route at that point, not wanting to direct this creep to where I was living. Luckily, my delivery job had made me familiar with a lot of the roads in the city. I headed for a particularly labyrinth neighborhood, turned in, and took as complicated a route as I could, and quickly as I could, and finally lost him in there. I thought that was the end of it. A few weeks later, during work at the takeout place, I stopped at a convenience store in the course of a delivery to get a soda. After I checked out, I saw this same guy. He smiled and raised his hand hello again. I hurried outside to my car, but this time I was in my shirt and hat from the takeout place. Now he knew where I worked. By the time I left the convenience store, he followed me again. Fortunately, I was able to lose him again, but spent the rest of the summer afraid to see him pop up at the place of my work, or worse, order food and bring me to his house. Thankfully, that did not happen. But skeevy guy who likes to follow people, let's not meet again.
You believe in ghosts? If so, then boy, do I have a real ghost story for you. Being so involved with the paranormal from an early age on, you tend to open yourself up to experiences that you've never previously had before. I'm of the belief that if you commit to actively hunting spirits, they will start to manifest and make themselves known to you. However, if you close yourself off to this realm, the chances of finding yourself in a paranormal situation are slim. A lack of commitment will result in most spirits ignoring you. Just think about it for a second. If you have absolutely no desire to see paranormal activity, why would a ghost waste their time trying to communicate with you? It would be just like talking to a wall. Just like the saying goes, seeing is believing, or in this case, investing is believing. This story I'm about to share with you, though just a story, is undeniable proof that ghosts are living among us in the human world. These experiences occurred late in September of 2005, and at the time, I was 15. My mother tragically perished in a car accident the year previously, and that left my dad to care for me alone. It was an absolutely miserable existence from then on, as this was the love of his life. My dad ended up being so depressed that I would often find him crying alone in his room at my house every single day for the next month and a half. I personally have never seen my dad suffer so much, and although I was also hurting, I was more concerned with my dad's well-being. It was then that I would start praying for Mom to return and give us a sign to at least help comfort my dad and let him know that she was okay. However, all that praying didn't seem to help. All of the nights begging God to send her back down to us for a message almost seemed futile. I remember doing spirit sessions alone to frantically contact my mom, using a Ouija board, a spirit box, anything I could get my hands on to help. I never got any signs, and the house stood silent, as quiet as it's ever been, except for the faint sounds of my dad crying most nights. It made me start to doubt and think that ghosts and God were imaginary. I lost my faith in nearly everything. I remember angrily saying to myself that God and ghosts don't exist. My dad is hurting so much. I wanted to connect with the afterlife so bad, and yet nothing is coming through. Show me something. I remember saying that in utter and complete frustration. Still nothing. But all that was soon about to change. I remember one late night, I could once again hear my dad sobbing in his room after a hard day's work. He came back later that day, around 10 p.m. He was lying on the bed, and to comfort my dad, I went to sleep with him in his room. We had a bed across from my dad's that I would sleep in. I reassured Dad that everything would be okay, even saying, "Dad, I can't lose you too. Please, you have a daughter to raise. Mom wouldn't let you go on like this." My dad simply smiled and told me that he would never give up on me or his life. So he fell asleep. I tried to fall asleep as well, laying in the bed across from me. This was the moment when I was finally going to see a sign that I had been desperately seeking. Although, this was not the sign I was looking for. An hour or so passes. I was drifting off to sleep when I saw a shadow, outlined in the form of a person. This wasn't a good shadow, because I felt a very negative energy. There were no features, except a shadow person looming over my grieving father. I then got up, turned on the light, and that shadow was gone. I went to wake my dad, and he wasn't waking up. I screamed so hard for Dad to wake up, but nothing. I went and called the ambulance immediately. They rushed him to the hospital. This nightmare just couldn't get any worse. I had already lost my mother, and I was on the verge of losing my father as well. So I waited, and I waited in the hospital. My aunt and uncle swung by to give me the most gigantic hug I've ever felt in my life. We were all waiting on the word for the status of my dad. As the doctor walks out, he has a very somber and stern look on his face. "Your dad suffered a heart attack in his sleep. We are doing everything in our power to make sure he recovers from this." What they didn't tell us in the moment was that he was fighting for his life and receiving life-saving emergency surgery. It turned out that he also died on an operating table, but came back. After hours of surgery, thankfully, my dad recovered and eventually woke up. The crazy part is, years after this incident, he finally told me that he experienced an out-of-body experience and said that he felt like he went to heaven. He remembers being able to see the doctors working on him. Then suddenly, he was in a sunny field with roses and daisies, all these beautiful flowers surrounding him. He then saw my mom in a blue dress, just smiling at him from a close distance. My dad saw his grandfather, who he had been really close with as a kid. He also saw his childhood dog Spike, and he was running around the field. They both waved at him, gesturing him to come forward. He felt nothing but peace as he moved forward. Everything just felt great for a moment. As he approached Mom, he gave her a great big hug, and my grandpa as well. He said he didn't feel like leaving this place at all, but he knew he couldn't stay. Grandpa said with a great big grin on his face, "We will see you later." Then suddenly, he woke up back in his body in intense pain. That same night my dad was having that episode, my uncle took me back to his house. As I waited for my dad to recover, I had a dream. I dreamt of the Grim Reaper and he was literally trying to drag my dad up into this dark room with red wallpaper. I remember screaming, "No, I need you, Dad," and trying to physically pull my dad away from the Reaper so he wouldn't take him through the door of the strange room. Eventually, the Reaper gave up and disappeared. My uncle rushed in to hug me, and I told him I had a nightmare. Years later, when my dad told me about what happened to him, I told him my nightmare as well. My theory is that the whole incident, the black shadow, the heart attack, the out-of-body experience, and my nightmare, they were all connected. Something dark and sinister was trying to take my dad away from me. And I feel like my dad's grandpa and my mom were somehow stopping this from happening. My uncle believed that my dad was just so worn out and hurt by the loss of my mother that it caused him to have a heart attack because of a broken heart. He does admit, though, that what my dad told us in the nightmare were very eerie, too coincidental to be one. The fact that I was praying for a sign, then challenged something from beyond, and then demanded one, made me feel like I really angered some sort of evil entities. I also believe that in those dark moments, good and evil were fighting for my dad to stay alive. My theory is that these dark forces are trying to take him away from me. I also know that because we're surrounded by so much darkness after we lost Mom, these dark spirits were taking advantage of us in the worst possible way, and I think they were feeding off of us. This whole time that I was hoping for a sign, it was there all along, and I should have realized this. Maybe we were consumed by a dark energy that whole time, and we needed a priest to bless this house. Eventually, that's what we ended up doing, and all felt pleasant and better. My dad slowly started feeling like himself, and the rest was history. I know this sounds insane, but I swear that all this happened, and it is 100% true. Thank you for my long story. Update. Fast forward 10 years. To my surprise, I recently found out that my old house, which was built in the early 1900s, was built on old Indian burial ground. I went to a psychic witch who did a reading on me, and we found out some fascinating things. That I could be surrounded and attached by spirit guides, one that represents good benevolence, and the other which is bad. She said that these two clash with one another, and when the bad spirits get through, they have the power to influence the entire mood of life and the events occurring. All this could have played a factor into what happened to my dad. She said this, plus the entities that are living in our home, including that dark forest cloud that I told you about, seem to have a spiritual clash where the good could be fighting evil. Now, I know this sounds wild, and maybe the witch was just making educated guesses, but after what had happened, I truly believe that there was something going on there. She suggested that she come to the house to perform positive rituals with her group of witches as sort of a good omen to ward off the bad spirits, even though we seemed to get rid of them. The psychic also stressed that because I still have these attachments, it is very possible that these things could continue and come back. She also suggested that the road my mom was driving on when she passed may have been cursed. She told me that just in case, they could go to the area of the accident to perform a positive healing ritual for the road. We also invited a group of witches to visit my dad in our old home, so we could defeat whatever darkness looms in our home. Well, they ended up showing up to our house late at night. 3 of the witches showed up, and me and my dad participated in the seance as well. We also used a Ouija board. First, we gathered around the kitchen table and held hands as the witches channeled for the spirits. They encouraged them to appear. They stated that they didn't mean any harm, and they wanted to figure out who exactly lives in this house. The main witch, Cynthia, who gave me a psychic reading, and told me about the clashing spirits. I mean, that she felt a tightness in her chest as soon as she walked into the kitchen. She did not sense any good vibes from the kitchen at all, even though the entire first floor, living room, felt more comfortable and at ease. She called out, "Who is the spirit that is choking me and making it hard to breathe?" That's when the kitchen cupboard opened by itself and slammed shut so hard that it startled all of us. That gave us the confirmation that there wasn't a positive ghost that resided in the home, or at least one of them. It was only seconds later that I heard a voice say "go away" in a very low and guttural tone. It was more of a whisper, but it immediately sent shivers down my spine. I turned to the psychic, who was sitting right next to me, and I asked her if she heard that. She said no, but that she could feel the presence of a dark shadow standing between us both. Cynthia then told us that she was getting messages in her mind that the spirit was named Tim, and that he used to be a very angry man, about middle-aged. What we were able to confirm next was crazy. We used a Ouija board and asked about Tim, and the Ouija board both confirmed that it was exactly him. Cynthia was right. She then said that Tim was a very lonely man after his entire family died in a house fire. We later found out that the house we lived in had been rebuilt shortly after. We asked the Ouija board to confirm, and to our surprise, the Ouija board spelled out yes. We then asked about Mom, if she was still okay, and if she passed on. We never actually got any answers from the Ouija board, nor did Cynthia. However, a few days after the whole incident, and I'm not sure if this was just a coincidence or not, but I ended up getting a random text from some unknown number. The text literally showed up with a YouTube link to the song "Found Out About You," a song by Gin Blossoms. That was my mom's favorite song. The song is also about grieving for the loss of a loved one, so it really seemed to be a direct message that tied into me and my family and what we experienced. Anyway, incredibly lengthy story, but I couldn't leave any details out. Thank you so much for reading. Today, me and my dad are doing great. Stay safe, everyone. This is my first, not my last experience. I'm a slight skeptic and a psychology major, so I believe in scientific explanations first and foremost when it comes to aliens and ghosts, before classifying it as a ghost story. I've always been overly curious about my family's lineage and who's related to who in my grandparents' tiny town, founded by my grandfathers and grandfather. I was adopted into the family, and I always felt like a bit of an outcast with no background of my own, so I linked to adapt my family's history, despite our lack of blood relation. One day while my father and I were visiting, he asked my grandmother if she wouldn't mind taking us to the graveyards around the tiny town and showing us around. She took us to the family graveyard, another family's graveyard, who's apparently not related in any way. And finally, she took us to a large church in Soldier Shared Graveyard. I was struck by how large this place was and immediately wandered away. It was about 99 degrees that day, with very little wind and high humidity. What happened next could have easily been caused by the heat, but as a half-skeptic, I'm not sure. I decided to tidy up around the headstone, believing it wasn't fair to neglect someone in life or death. As I traveled around emptying out dirty vases, straightening flowers, dusting dirt off headstones, I came across 4 neat little graves in a row. The graves were old, moldy, and worn. Each one had a little weather-worn clipped tulip in front of it, and each one bore the same title, Infant. I don't like to talk about it, but I suffer from an anxiety disorder that causes me to be emotionally numb. It's extremely hard for me to feel empathy or sympathy, but looking at those little graves, I felt my heart break in my chest. I run my fingers over each one and whispered a little prayer for them. I walked away to continue my volunteered grave cleaning duties and feeling a little strange tug to go back to the little ones' graves and stay there. After a few moments, I stopped under a large tree for a rest, drenched in sweat. Someone had hung a wind chime over another grave. On the same tree, I blankly studied it, listening to my grandmother and father talking across the graveyard. I could see the infant's grave out of the corner of my eye. I reached up to touch the chime. When I froze in place, a cold feeling slid down my spine and consumed my stomach. Without thinking, I turned quickly towards the infant's graves and stopped cold. A woman was standing beside the second stone. She had ebony black hair down to her thin waist, and she was wearing the old-fashioned blue dress that looked straight out of the 1900s. But that wasn't the most remarkable thing about her. Her face was smooth, round, and pale, and literally blank. She had no eyes, lips, nose, nothing. I gasped, involuntarily took a step backwards, flinching at the sight. When I recovered, she had vanished without a trace. The last thing I wanted to mention about the cemetery is another night I actually went back to the cemetery on my own, and I noticed something that was really alarming. What I noticed was something so alarming that it literally made my face turn pale. Now, I'm not saying this was a ghost, but I saw a group of people who were in a circle around a gravestone. Even creepier, they all had what looked like brown robes on and hoods on. It was like some sort of cult. That's why I can't immediately just say that it was a ghost or a group of ghosts, because it's pretty obvious that it may have been something else. Maybe it was just some sort of evil ritual that they were performing out there. But I didn't want to last long over there, so I bolted. How's that for a couple of crazy encounters with some spiritual entities or some cult-like figures? Anyway, I really hope you enjoy these pair of stories. They weren't the longest in the world, but I think they were very effective. What do you think? Let me know.
When I was 4, I shared a room with my mother. I slept in a toddler bed that was low to the ground. If I laid on my side, I could see under her bed. One night after she turned out the lights and got into bed, I happened to look over and see these red eyes staring at me from under her bed. I was so scared that I couldn't move and just continued staring at it. The eyes were close to the ground and did not blink. I finally started to scream and cry. My mom jumped out of bed and turned on the light. She looked under the bed, and so did I. There was nothing there. She turned out the light and got back into bed. The eyes were there again. This happened 3 times that night, but never happened again. This is where it gets really freaky. When my oldest daughter was 4, she was playing in her room alone. When she started screaming, I ran in and asked her what was wrong. She told me that there were red eyes looking at her from her toy box. I had never told her what had happened to me. Well, I completely flipped out, and we ended up running from the room. She never slept in there again. I recently asked her about this, and she told me that their eyes were looking back and forth, but didn't blink. I wonder if this is some kind of demon or something. When my middle daughter was 4, she told me that angels talk to her at night. She's 5 now, and it doesn't happen anymore. My son is about to turn 4 next month, and I'm terrified of what supernatural thing will happen to him. My only consolation is that it should only happen when he's 4.
This is not my actual personal experience. The house that I currently live in is extremely old and has a lot of history. My aunt had once lived in this house before me and my family. She had never experienced anything out of the ordinary. She had just come back from the hospital, having just given birth to her newborn daughter. The night she had returned home, she had done everything as normal and had gone to bed. The baby's cot stood just across the room. She woke up in the middle of the night, simply terrified by what she saw. A ghost with a small figure at its side stood looking into the cot holding a knife. My aunt first lay frozen in her bed, not knowing what to do. She finally worked up the courage after several minutes and ran to grab the newborn baby and ran out of the house. The room in which this occurred is now my room, and I can honestly say I've never seen an apparition, but I've heard many things during the night, such as when I once heard the banging footsteps of someone climbing the stairs. This had really frightened me, so the next day, I'd asked my sister if she had heard the noises. She replied yes. The weird noises continue up until this day, but we are now used to this, so we never really get scared, as we had done years ago. But just several weeks ago, my sister lay in her room watching TV, and all of a sudden, a black figure emerged in the corner of the room. The figure vanished, and we have never heard or seen anything unusual since. My name is Sam. I've been interested in ghost spirits and other unexplained phenomena for years now. When I was young, between the ages of 6 to about 13, I had experiences in the house I grew up in. I'm now 29 years old, but I know that something happened, and that there are things that we as people can't even explain. My story takes place in Tallahassee, Florida, home of the Seminoles. I was about 6 or 7 years old. I always heard footsteps walking down the hall of my house, and sometimes it sounded like the floor was just simply creaking, like old wood, I guess. The creaking sound moved down the hall like footsteps, though. On several incidents, I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear footsteps in the hallway. I never saw any apparitions, but I'm sure they exist. There is a sleep paralysis where you can wake up from your sleep, but not be able to move. I've seen many accounts of this on your website. I've personally awakened plenty of times in my youth, and could do nothing except look around in my room. I've never felt as if someone was holding me down, but I'm 100% positive I was wide awake, and I couldn't move. On one occasion, a Saturday morning, I woke to the sun shining through my window. I wasn't scared, mainly because it was daytime, about 10 a.m. in the morning, but I was frozen solid. I tried my hardest to move my legs, my arms, and just talk, but I couldn't do anything. In the past, I would just lay there, and in time, the paralyzing feeling went away. This morning, I decided to lie in bed and just wait. What seemed like minutes was only seconds when I heard whispering just above and behind my head. My bed was against a wall, and my dresser was a foot or two away from the head of my bed against another wall, in the corner. The whispers came from that corner. It sounded as if two people were telling secrets just behind me. At this point, I snapped free from my frozen state and immediately jumped out of bed and dashed into the kitchen where my mother was cooking breakfast. I know something was there, but I was so scared that I didn't look back. I clenched my mom's legs, and she asked me what's wrong. I explained to her what had happened, and she kind of blew it off. There is no solid evidence that anything had happened, but I know what I experienced. That wasn't the only thing to happen. If you live in Florida, then you've experienced a hurricane. Hurricane Kate hit Florida in the mid-1980s. My mother was a single mom at the time and was trapped at City Hall during the hurricane. She worked for the city, so during the bad storm, they didn't want to let them drive in the weather and asked the workers to stay until the storm let up. My brother is about 5 years older than me, so my mom called and asked him to watch out for us until she could get home. The hurricane soon knocked the power out in the entire neighborhood, and probably in several parts of the city. She called again and asked my brother and I to sit in the hall, where there were no windows or doors, until the storm stopped. I, being the younger of the two brothers, felt comfortable with my brother and soon dozed off to sleep. When I fell asleep, my brother said he began to hear footsteps walking up and down the hall. Sometimes the footsteps walked right past us. He also said, no matter how hard he tried to wake me, I wouldn't wake up. So we had to endure the steps and freaky sounds alone. He said it sounded as if 3 or 4 people were in the hall walking around. When I woke up, city workers were outside working on the telephone pole, trying to restore electricity to the neighborhood. My brother was curled up by the front door, almost relieved to see light, even if it was just lights from the work truck and light from the sparks of labor to the transformer on the pole. At this time, my brother told me about the footsteps he had heard and how happy he was the lights were coming back on. Other incidents happened, but nothing really worth talking about. I just wanted to share my story because the site is very interesting. I have 2 experiences that I know are so unusual that I thought I might share. It's a little short, but I know that these were some freaky ghost occurrences, and I simply can't not tell it. My eyes don't play tricks on me, and I wasn't tired or hallucinating. In fact, this first story, especially my friend's experience, was also very real and happened at school. I was about 8 years old. I was riding my bike in trails of the woods near our house. I'd been riding for so long that I lost track of time, and being an 8-year-old kid, of course it was the time of my life. I ended up getting lost in the woods and the trail for quite some time. It had to be a couple hours, and it started to get dark. So as the sun was setting, I tried to make my way back the way I entered. As I was going through the woods, I ended up going through a cornfield, and from a distance, what I saw couldn't be ignored. I saw a short figure of a man just standing in between the cornfield bushes. It almost looked like a leprechaun. Obviously, I know leprechauns aren't real, but it was the best way I could describe this ghost. It was a scraggly looking thing, and stood 3 to 4 feet tall. It disappeared after a few minutes, and was gone. I am the only person who ever saw this thing. There was never any mention of a ghost near these cornfields. For a while, I didn't even want to say anything, for the fear of looking crazy. Plus, at 8 years old, who will take what I saw seriously? Today there are houses where I saw it, so the cornfield doesn't even exist anymore. Another weird thing that happened to my friends at school. Between the Christian middle school and high schools in town, there are some woods here. I never saw this, but some of my friends at the time did. One time, they looked into the brush and saw a pale-faced man in a hoodie or a robe of some sort. I'm guessing that it was some sort of ghost monk or something. They looked lost, but he didn't move at all. He was just squatting in some brush. When I was told about it, it made me realize that my experience might have been tied to this one, and that I wasn't as crazy as I thought. What happened was just odd. It's possible that the guy in the robe just could have been a creepy dude spying on the school. Personally, I think the one at school was just some weirdo, but the leprechaun could be something. However, I wouldn't just write it off, as I know that'd be hypocritical in doing so. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you think. A couple of months ago, I was living in a house with my friends that had a history of strange sightings and stories. I personally had never seen anything there, but had somewhere else. That was about to change. I was standing in the kitchen with one of my friends, and we were the only two people in the house at this time. The kitchen door was slightly open, and all of a sudden, I heard what sounded like a gentle whisper in my ear. As I looked towards the door, I saw a lady walk past the door, wearing jeans and trainers towards the front entrance of the home. At first I thought it was my friend Laura, who always used to wear jeans, so I popped my head around the corner to try and scare her, but there was no one there. I wasn't scared because it was in the middle of the day. I actually found the experience quite exciting, but also unexplainable. We bought my father's-in-law house with the understanding that he was to stay with us so we could take care of him. He was in his mid-70s and not in the best of health. Before we moved in, we turned the 2 upstairs bedrooms into 3 bedrooms. My husband was upstairs taking the panels off the walls and called me upstairs to figure out how and where to move the heating duct. As soon as I got to the top of the stairs, my husband hung his hammer on a nail that was sticking out of a stud. We were standing right next to the stud the whole time I was upstairs with him. We were the only 2 upstairs. When we were finished talking, he went to grab for his hammer. It was no longer hanging on the stud. We looked for it for about 15 minutes before finding it under a pile of panels about 10 feet away from the stud it was hung on. We just gave each other a raised eyebrow look and didn't say anything about it. The TV would always turn on and off by itself. It was my father-in-law's TV that was sat in the living room. It was the only TV in the house that did that, no matter what outlet it was plugged into. I would turn it off, and by the time I would walk into the kitchen, it would be on again. I would have to say something like, "I don't have time to play right now," before it would finally stop. I was at work the night my father-in-law passed away. It was 3 a.m. on a Monday morning when one of the high-low drivers broke a main water line that caused all the presses to be shut down. I'd been working there for 2 years and had never seen or heard all of the press operators being sent home, as there is always something else for us to do. I went straight home and straight into my father-in-law's room to check on him and tell him what happened. We had a close bond and talked about everything. He was gone. His estimated time of death was 3 a.m. It may have been a coincidence, but man, what a coincidence. After my father-in-law passed away, I experienced only one more thing. I was up in my room and heard my son call me from the kitchen. I was at the top of the stairs and he was at the bottom of the stairs. He asked me what I wanted. I asked him what he meant because I heard him call me. He just shook his head and said, "Oh, Not this again. I came home from work early again one night, about a month after my father-in-law had passed away. I walked into my son's room to see if he was home yet. He was lying in his bed with the blankets over his head. My son was 18 at the time. I whispered, "Are you still awake?" He popped out his head from under his blanket and told me that he heard footsteps in his room just a few minutes before I got home. Could have been the cat, I told him. No, definitely human, he said. But when he looked to see who it was, there was nobody there. My oldest brother heard me and her brother talking downstairs and came down. She told me about an hour before I got home. She thought she heard someone walking around downstairs. She thought it was her brother. She heard footsteps from his room to the bathroom. She went downstairs and peeked her head in his room. Not in there. She walked to the bathroom, but the door was standing open, so she knew he wasn't in there. She was spooked, so she went upstairs and didn't come back down until I got home. We moved to a big old farmhouse in 2004. In my former residence where myself, my husband, and my teenage son lived, there were lots of paranormal happenings. All three of us experienced strange things, but the one that was the most bizarre happened while I was asleep in my bed. My husband had gone away on business for a few days, so I was alone this particular night. My son was asleep in his room down the hall. I owned a large male cat named Bing, who almost always spent the night on my bed. I also had a hamster that was kept in a cage in my son's bedroom. The cage door was broken, so we tied it up with baggy ties. She had escaped once or twice, so I had planned on buying a new cage the next day. As I lay sleeping in my bed, I could remember hearing someone yelling in my ear, "Wake up," several times. I then found myself standing in the hallway, and to my disbelief, my cat had the hamster cornered and was about to pounce. I screamed for my son, and he came to the rescue before anything could happen. Someone had made sure that I would wake up in time. That's for sure. I know I heard those words "wake up" repeated several times. I was not terribly afraid at the time because I figured that this entity had to be friendly. Before I moved into the house on Willoughby Lane, I never had given the slightest thought to paranormal activities, and had always dismissed it with a wave of the hand and an offhand comment of how such things are scientifically impossible. However, all that changed a few years ago when myself and my newly acquired husband decided to buy an old farmhouse in upstate New York. The real estate agent, while giving us a tour of the home, had in fact related some disturbing information to us. She told us about 20 years ago, a young woman who had lived there with her 2 sons and her father, who apparently was an alcoholic as well as an abusive parent, had gone missing. Her remains had never been found. There had been almost certain proof that her father had murdered her, and was shortly thereafter tried and sentenced to 10 years in prison, where he had almost died. I thought nothing of this, except for the fact that one day I might be gardening and dig up a little bit more than dirt. However, this did not stop us from buying the home, which was gorgeous, with green shutters, a post and beam barn which was in good repair, and a drive that was lined in grand old maple trees. But my friend, who was indeed a strong believer in the supernatural, strongly advised us that there might be what she called restless spirits residing in the home. Again, me being convinced there was no such thing did not take her warning seriously. After a long day of moving all of our possessions into a newly bought home, I'd fallen asleep in what was soon to be the living room. The movers had helped me bring in our couch, as well as an old rocking chair we had found in the barn. Both my husband and I thought we were able to save the old thing, which was made of oak and not damaged, except for the fact that the seat itself was no longer there. I was snoring away on the couch when I awoke, drowsily, to a consistent creaking. My husband, who was at work, and the movers, who had long since gone home, were absent, leaving me alone in the home. As I looked around, I noticed that the rocking chair was moving, as if someone was in it. Needless to say, I was incredibly scared, and proceeded to throw a book I'd been reading at the chair, or running out of the home. As the weeks passed, more and more of these types of things would happen, all ending with me rather frightened. Things would disappear and reappear without notice, some of which would never be there in the first place. Some of these items consisted of a wide collection of women's jewelry that I occasionally would find in what we found out later used to be a bedroom. Though we converted it into a study, I would hear knockings. Doors would open and shut for no apparent reason. We would occasionally hear the faint creaking of the rocking chair, even though I had insisted it be placed back in the barn. Occasionally, I would hear hushed voices and see flashes of what appeared to be figures out of the corner of my eye. This behavior increased as time passed, till I was starting to get used to it. I even admit to talking with the spirit whenever I was alone in the home. I would always be rewarded with an abrupt cease in all abnormal activity. On the evening of the housewarming party me and my husband were holding, one of my friends came to me in a state of anxiety. They said that they had been in the basement when they saw a woman standing there, staring at them, then turning and vanishing. Myself and a few others hurried down to the basement, where we looked all over, trying to find the woman. What we did find was a hidden cupboard with what was later confirmed to be the remains of Sue Hoover, the woman who disappeared nearly 20 years ago. After this finding, the noises and sightings immediately stopped, and we have yet to hear the slightly disturbing creak of the old rocking chair, which we eventually moved back into the home and repaired. However, I will never forget my experiences that year, and never again doubt the existence of spirits in the physical world again. I'm a great fan of your site, and I've submitted some of my own stories. The other day, I remembered an experience my sister Christy had many years ago. Although I was not a direct witness to this, I was there when she came home in hysterics. She was in such a state that we all thought she was attacked, and we could not get any sense out of her. The story goes like this. Christy had been walking home from a friend's house down a long lane called Langley Lane. On the right-hand side of this lane, there was a field which was used for cattle from a local farm. There was also a book with a large tree hanging over it. The summer before, I think this happened later in the year, as it was quite dark early, a young man had hanged himself from this tree during a fit of depression. I recall that other people have hanged themselves there too, at least one other one that I know of. I think I was about 16 at the time. I'm now 36, and Christy would have been about 11. Anywho, myself and my brother were sat in the house one evening, and that's when we heard Christy loudly banging on the front door to be let in. She was crying hysterically and was trying to talk but couldn't. She was obviously very distressed, and we thought that she had been attacked. When she eventually did calm down, which was sometime later that evening, she told me what had happened. She said that she was walking down Langley Lane when she looked over at the tree and saw a figure hanging from it. She said that the figure was glowing white and had a bend in its neck, like its neck had been broken. She then proceeded to run all the way home, which was a distance of about 1/4 mile. She did not want to tell her brother, as she thought he would not believe her. Having had experiences myself, I am open-minded and certainly don't feel like she made it up. She has always stood by her story. I was looking at your haunted places in Houston, Texas. I grew up there. I came across the Jefferson Davis Hospital, and it reminded me of something. Once, after a good night of hanging out, a group of friends and I decided to go and check it out. When we got there, I immediately felt unwanted. My skin crawled with fear. I kept telling everyone that we were not welcome there. We were only equipped with several lighters, so the shadows were unbelievable. We kept hearing people talk, thinking it was someone else in the hospital. Someone would call out, but nobody would answer. I kept feeling something touch my back, thinking it was my boyfriend. I turned around, but he was a couple of feet away from me. The entire time I was there, I kept telling him that we needed to leave. My friends got annoyed with me, so we decided to leave. As we were leaving the building, I was holding my boyfriend's hand, and something shoved me. I fell so hard that I twisted my ankle. It was swollen for weeks, and my doctor couldn't tell me why. Nothing was broken. It finally healed after 6 months. I still have problems with my ankle to this day. I have an experience that I would like to submit to the website. I've attached it below. After my encounter one late night in August with my sister, I found out that we'd always been around ghosts. My family has moved 5 times, and in every place, there had been at least one ghost there with us. When I lived in Texas, I moved from Houston to San Antonio. In that move, a ghost that we'd had for a year followed us to our new apartment. After living there for about a year, we discovered a new ghost. This one would hold the bathroom doors closed and knock over items we had on display. The event that completely changed my view of the paranormal happened in August of 2001. It was the early hours of the morning, about 4 a.m., and for some reason, I couldn't sleep. My older sister was on her computer, and she found a bunch of old music files she had downloaded for her history of rock class. Then she came across a Britney Spears parody song, downloaded from a radio station's website. The song itself was actually an E-clip, about 30 to 40 seconds long. We played it, and for some reason the file was corrupt. The words were garbled, playing in a slow, deep, incomprehensible voice. I had chills listening to it play, and when I looked at the counter, it had been playing for over a minute. My sister finally turned it off. She was just as spooked as I was. We moved on, laughing about the look on each other's face. Then about 5 minutes later, we heard 3 soft, solid pounds on the back wall in the far back of the apartment. Neither one of us said a word. We just listened, trying to explain away in our minds. We lived on the 2nd floor and shared only one wall, and that was not it. Another couple seconds passed by, and the banging jumped to the one long wall we shared, still towards the back of the apartment, but getting closer. We couldn't help but to stare at each other. After that one, We finally decided to ask others if she'd heard that. Of course we heard the same thing, and not a minute later, the banging jumped to the room next to us, on the same wall. 3 solid bangs escalating in amplitude. My heart was racing, waiting for the next set, afraid of where it would jump next. A couple of minutes passed, and just as it began to calm down, and blame the banging on the maintenance worker that we shared the wall with, the banging suddenly jumped forward to the wall behind the computer. I looked above me to see the ceiling light shaking. Moments later, the banging shot across the room to the balcony. It sounded as if the entire wall was pounded on with one giant fist. 3 echoing pounds later, everything stopped. I checked the sliding doors, and they were locked, thankfully. We both ran into my mother's room, and somehow she was still sleeping. She hadn't heard a thing. That was something I never understood. My baby brother was in the same room with her, door closed, and he heard a soft rumble, and my mother heard nothing. After that experience, I've always been a little on edge. I always think about what would have happened if I had left the sliding doors unlocked that night, and what the thing was trying to get in. One thing I know for sure is that my ghost from Houston left that night, and the one already there seemed to get more active. Everyone started to hear their name being called, even when no one was around. Luckily, no one ever attempted to communicate with whatever it was. As a matter of fact, we rarely began to answer unless we saw the person who was calling us. 2 years later, after I finished high school, we moved to Iowa when I was accepted to college, and so far, we've not had any strange paranormal occurrences. "8 years ago, myself, my husband, and my brother lived at this home. We were told by the neighbor that no one ever lasts, and we didn't either. Not because of the haunting, but because we needed to come back to Massachusetts for family reasons. Anyway, we lived in this house for 9 months. We were told the AC was broken, and in the Valley of Folsom it gets very hot, but not in our living room. It was always very cool in that part of the home. On one occasion, I was in the bathroom, and after my shower, I was looking towards the mirror, and I saw an orange blur over my shoulder. I turned to look, but it wasn't there. It looked as though it was a face, and it would have been standing at the right height, to where a head would be on a grown man. After a few weeks, I mentioned it to my brother and my husband, and my brother relayed a story about one night, while sound asleep, he was awoken by a very large thud on his bed. He said it felt like a bowling ball had landed on the bed, like someone sat down. He said he was too scared to look, so he fell back to sleep. After a few more months, we found out that the house used to belong to the town doctor that treated inmates from the Folsom prison back in the 1800s. After putting all the info together, we realized we were living in a haunted home. I was hoping to see other stories about the house on this website, but maybe my story will start to flow. When I was 11, my father died from a heart attack in our home. Because of the trauma on my little sister, she witnessed people trying to resuscitate him. Our mother decided to move. We ended up moving just a little bit further down the road, into an older house that had been built in the early 70s. The owner of the house also died in the house many years before. It was a 2-story house, and the bottom level was made of cinder block. I'm guessing because of this, it was the reason that it was always cold downstairs. Luck or unluck would have it that The bottom level would be mine and my sister's rooms. It always was a creepy feeling downstairs. It always felt like you were being watched. But I always just chalked it up to an overactive imagination. Me and my sister both felt uncomfortable in the downstairs area. It consisted of our 2 rooms, a laundry room, and a cellar. One morning, when I was 14, I was standing in front of my dresser and putting on my makeup. Then, I heard a voice come up to my right ear and whisper my name. The fact that on my right side was a wall really freaked me out. I ran upstairs and asked my mom had she called for me. She told me that she had not. I hated sleeping in that room from that time on, and always tried to sleep with the light on, even though it drove my mom nuts. My sister had a similar experience. I was staying at my friend's house one night, and my sister went upstairs to make sure the door leading outside was closed. She said that as she went to place her foot on the bottom step, she said something came up to her and whispered my name. She said that she also experienced things being thrown in the dark when there was no one to throw them, such as a sock. My mom lives there by herself now, and as far as I know, she has never had anything odd happen to her. But whenever I visit, she knows that I will not sleep in the lower bedrooms. I still feel odd in the lower level, but not as bad as I used to. If anyone has any thoughts or suggestions on this, I would love to hear it. Feel free to email me. Hi, I'm 40 years old, and this story is very true. When my brother, sister, and I were young, about 7, 8, or 9, maybe even younger, we used to see what we would call the brown man. He was brown from head to toe. We came to the conclusion he was a shadow spirit, but with a literal brown look, not tucking skin, but visibly brown. His hat, his face, his clothes, and his shoes were all brown, different shades, but all brown. We would see him periodically and take off running when we did, but our parents never would see him. We'd walk from the kitchen and turn the corner, and he'd just be standing there. Sometimes we'd hear the toilet set drop, just little things. After we grew up, my sister was about 25 when she had her first child. She had a girl. My sister's daughter used to what we thought talk to herself when she was about 2 or 3 years old, and my sister decided it was time to ask her who she was talking to. And her daughter told her, Mr. Burgess. This went on for some time. She would play, have tea parties, and sing with him just about every time she was in my parents' home. Well, one day, my niece asked my sister why Mr. Burgess wore brown all the time. Needless to say, that really shook us up because we thought we saw the brown man. We would tease each other and say, the brown man's behind you, and get a real kick out of it. I've since had 3 children, and my sister another daughter, but they've never come in contact or ever seen the brown man.
We live in a haunted house. It is really not bad once you get used to it. In fact, at times, when there's no activity, you can actually get a little lonesome for them. We moved here in 1982. It wasn't long after we settled into our new house that we bumped into the former owner at the local church. She asked us if we had seen the ghost. We didn't know what she was talking about. She said it sometimes appears in the front bedroom, our daughter's room, as a shadowy figure of a woman in a rocking chair. Our daughter overheard us talking about it and she said, "Oh, that must be the lady who sits in the chair at my desk at night. She doesn't bother me, just sits there kind of watching after me." We had noticed some strange things in the house, but put them off to natural causes such as the reoccurring footsteps in the hardwood floors after we went to bed, the strange way the television would turn on and off by itself,
other electric appliances doing funny things, and objects disappearing then turning up somewhere else, but we dismissed the idea of it being ghosts until one late night. My wife woke up thirsty in the middle of the night, so she went to the kitchen to get a drink. When she got to the living room, she saw someone in the shadows in the middle of the room. Thinking one of the kids had gotten out of bed, she hollered, "Get your butt back in bed." The figure streaked off and disappeared. It didn't go around the sofa, it went through the sofa. It didn't walk, it glided. It was the figure of a woman with long black hair. The kids were sound asleep in their beds. My wife came back to bed without her water. My first experience with her was about 10 p.m. one night. I was walking home from next door, and as I approached the driveway, I saw a figure of a woman walking in the drive. She was cutting across the edge of the lawn on the north side of my shop about 20 feet away. The light on the north side of the shop was on, illuminating her faintly. I could make out no details of her, only a dark figure of a slender woman walking briskly towards our house from the west. As I got in range of the motion detector light on the east side of my workshop, it came on. The figure vanished. This phantom female I saw matched the description of the dark woman other family members have seen in our house. But the dark woman is not the only spirit in our home. We have discovered there are others. Some are shy and reclusive. Some are a little mischievous and playful. They like to play with stuff, just to let you know they are there, I think. They hide things. You put something down and a minute later it is gone. You search all over and then find it right back where you laid it in the first place. They turn things on and off. TVs, radios, just about anything, even water faucets. One morning, my son went into the kitchen to get a drink of water. Dad, come here. I went into the kitchen to see what was wrong. "What's this all about?" my son asked. He was standing back from the sink, pointing to the faucet which was running full blast. My wife was standing beside him. "The knob is turned off, but it's still running," he said. We stood and watched it for a minute. Figuring a faulty valve, I started to walk towards the sink to try to turn it off by myself, and suddenly, it just stopped. Turned off all by itself. I looked it over, turned it on, and then turned it back off again. It worked fine. I checked the valves the next day, and everything was functioning properly and has worked fine since. TVs are a real favorite. I was waking up from a nap one evening when I heard the television on in the living room. I assumed my son was home and was watching a movie. As I arose, I heard the television turn off. When I went into the living room, the lights were off, the television was off, the door was still locked, and my son was not there. My wife and I were the only people in the house, and she was still sleeping. I turned on the television, and the same movie I had heard from the bedroom was playing. Radios are popular with them too. On another occasion with my wife, my daughter and I were watching television in the living room. All of a sudden, the CD player comes on and starts playing a CD at high volume. My wife got up and turned it off. Reaction from all of us was very casual. "Go to Grandma's if you want to listen to music. We are watching TV," I jokingly said out loud. At the time, my mother was living in a mobile home behind the property. My sister was staying with her. I found out the next day they took my suggestion to heart. My sister called. "I went out to go to work," she said. "The radio in the van was playing. I thought someone left it on. Oh great, now the battery will be dead," I thought. Then I realized the radio doesn't work unless the key is on. I was holding the key in my hand. That's weird, I thought. I unlocked the door and I reached in to turn off the radio and it was already off. It quit playing when I touched it, so I put the keys in the ignition and turned on the radio and it came on. I turned off the ignition and it went off. Ignition on, radio on. Ignition off, radio off. Does not work without a key. How is it playing without the key in the ignition and the knob turned off? She asked. We have all gotten used to our ghosts now. Our children have grown up around them and have their own stories. Their friends and ours have all been scared out of their wits a time or two, but are accustomed to it now. New friends take a little time to get acclimated though. My son was in his teenage years and most of his friends knew about our house. His new friend Jason did not though. My wife and I had gone out for the evening and my son was having a party. All his friends were over. Everyone was having a good time but Jason. He was tired. Jason was new to Tommy's parties. Jason was also new to our house. If he had known about the things that happened here, he might have not left the main group and gone to the game room where it was quiet. Most of our friends know and have experienced eerie things while here with enough frequency that it really doesn't surprise them. But Jason was new, ripe picklings from a mischievous ghost. So Jason left the party and went into the game room by himself, where he laid on the floor to get a little rest. My son and his friends were only a little surprised to see Jason run into the living room pale and frightened. The pinball machine, Jason said. Flash Gordon, it came on all by itself and started playing itself. There's nobody in there, and it just came on and started playing. Yeah, so? Responded my son's other friend, who was so accustomed to such things here. Flash was Philip's favorite machine, my son explained casually. Philip was our nephew who died in an accident a short time before. He was probably just enjoying a round of pinball, said my son. He is a nice guy. He won't bother you. Everyone went on about having fun, except for Jason. He stuck close to the group for the rest of the night, but he never came back to our house. There have been times when these spirits have saved the day for us. We once awoke to find a fire had started on our patio by a candle left burning when we went to bed. About 15 square feet of one wall covered in rattan was charred from the flames, but somehow, mysteriously, it had gone out by itself. The dry rattan, though very flammable, had just stopped burning. This was not the only time. It had only been a couple of weeks since we buried my wife's brother, Virgil. Tragically, he was killed by a car while walking home. My wife had been cleaning out his mobile home next door. A terrible task, but she faced it with courage and fortitude. Sometimes I think she is operating on automatic pilot. She came home and told me, I saw him, Virgil. He was just standing there in the doorway of his trailer while I was sorting out his things. He said nothing. Then he disappeared. A few days after that, my dad came into the shop where I was working. Do you know the door on Virgil's mobile home is open? He asked. No, I replied. I'll check it out. The home was vacant since Virgil died. We were watching his property while probate proceeded. I walked over and saw the front door ajar. I feared the worst, that the vacant home had been broken into. We were careful to lock the door, and no one else had a key. I carefully entered the premises. The overwhelming odor was unmistakable. Propane, strong. I had to exit immediately. A gas leak. The house was full of it. I went to the rear of the home and found the main gas valve. I turned it off. Covering my mouth, I entered the home again. Quickly, I began opening windows. I could not stay in there for very long. I can't believe this place didn't blow up, I said to myself. It's a good thing the front door was open, but how did the front door get open anyway? Sometimes they go with us, sort of a spirit field trip, I suppose. In 1998, my wife and I took on extra jobs. I was managing and bartending at a local hotel bar, and my wife was the cocktail waitress. I guess they got lonesome for us. No one at home to pester and all, maybe just bored. So they started going to work with us. We were at the lounge. It started out small. TV on, TV off, glasses doing funny stuff, that sort of thing. We had closed for the night. It was clean up time. I was walking to the kitchen when I heard a noise from the juice box. The pages of cards, which show the selections, were flipping on their own. Page after page flipped, all in one direction, then it would switch and go back the other direction. This was just the start. They seemed to prefer after hours at the bar. We were cleaning up one night when we decided the small table and chairs would look better if I moved them farther away from the pool table. I moved them over near the dance floor. I proceeded to clean the rest of the bar. When I turned around, the table and chairs we moved are back in their original positions by the pool table. The next night we decided to mess with them. After closing, we rearranged the entire setup in the bar. Tables, chairs, everything. Then we went to my office, got our stuff together to go home, and walked out to find everything back where it was originally. What had taken us a couple of hours to do, they had accomplished in a few minutes. We have lived here in the magic spot about 25 years now. I have notebooks full of activity, notes about ghostly occurrences, sightings, etc. We have never tried photography, but being an artist, I've done paintings of some of the entities we have here. We also experience really odd weather patterns, most often in the winter. Radios and televisions, actually just about any electronic device, is likely to act up when used here, and we have learned more about the history of this area. A local Native American medicine man once told me this place gives them the willies. Teenagers refer to this place and the surrounding area as the magic spot and have many stories about it. Over the years, we have actually had a good relationship with our ghosts. Though at times mischievous, for the most part, they just go about their own business and we do the same.
We do at times bump into each other, however. Sometimes it is much surprise to them as it is to us. Sometimes it is nice to have them around. Other times it can be quite frightening. I was actually surprised one late night, and it and I streaked off in opposite directions. I don't know which of us was more surprised. They have become as much a part of our home as our family members. It wouldn't be the same without them. As the youngest of 5 children, all boys, and the son of the 7th daughter, of the 7th daughter, of the 7th daughter, supernatural followers will know that means a white witch. I've seen many strange things. I and my brothers grew up in what would be described as a haunted house. At a very young age, I loved to play in my parents' bedroom, which overlooked the landing, first 2 steps, and small landing at the top of the stairs. On an almost daily basis, I saw shadows walking along the landing. They were not ordinary shadows. These were floating. They were not cast on the wall, but were in midair, but I could see through them. As I got older, they seemed to happen less frequently. I still see these shadows occasionally, out of the corner of my eye. In the early 80s, my brothers discovered the Ouija board method of entertainment, which heralded some very interesting results. On one such session on the Ouija board, the spirit known to us as Paraga put us in touch with a chap called Ray with a message for my father. I can't remember the surname that we were given, but we passed the message on to my father, who accused us of conspiring with my mother to try to persuade him that Ouija board works. Of course, this was simply not the case. It turned out that his friend Ray had committed suicide while my eldest brother was very young. Therefore, it would be impossible for us to know anything about it unless we were told by someone. We simply had no knowledge prior to the session of events that had taken place so many years before. On another occasion when I was 11 or 12, we had a very strange encounter. My mother and father were out for the evening, and my brothers were left to look after me. The session took place in the dining room, which had one exit into the kitchen. From the kitchen, you could exit to the hall towards the front door, or a door latch with one bolt lock to the back garden and side entrance to the property. There was a window looking into the garden that the strange phenomena took place in. It was a strange session that seemed to pick up an angry persona. All of a sudden, there was a bluish glowing light out the back of the house, and the window started to shake violently. As we made a mad dash for the kitchen, the door to the back garden also started to shake violently. We all ran for our lives out the front door and scattered in all directions up and down the road. There was snow on the ground, and I was dressed in PJs and no shoes. It was almost half an hour and much deliberation before we returned to the house and went in. There were no signs of any strange happenings. We used playing cards with letters drawn on the back, and yes and no written on separate cards and numbers in the middle of the table in a row, and some excellent shaped wine glasses that were virtually impossible to push. In an early experiment, the glass zoomed round and round with great speed. All of a sudden, it left the table lifting up to the top corner of the room and smashing into small pieces. Even the stem and base broke into pieces, the biggest the size of your little fingernail. Anyone who has ever broken a wine glass will know it takes a tremendous force to break the stem and base to that extent. In 1985, at the age of 15, I was walking home to the family home around 10 p.m. from a friend's house. It was a wet and windy night, and I walked with the collar up on my coat with my chin tucked into the top of my zip, only looking up every now and then to see where I was going. There is a small village in the outskirts of the city, just down the road from the family home. I was walking towards the village, where I would have to turn right to go in the right direction to get home. Approximately 1,000 yards before the road I was walking along came to an end, there's a 10-story block of flats, and next to that, a retirement home. As you get nearer to the end of the road, approximately 500 yards from the end, there was a row of tenant bungalow flats going along the road I was approaching and intending to turn right towards home. To the left was a large grass area between them and the main road. I passed the end bungalow flat, heading to the T-junction with the grass area to my left and approximately 100 yards of space all around me to the nearest object, some small bushes. All of a sudden, I saw a pair of brown shoes come into view a couple of steps in front of me. Startled, I looked up to see an elderly gentleman in front of me. I took a step sideways and went around him. Something struck me as strange, and after a few more steps, I turned around to see nobody behind me. There was absolutely no way that the old man walking slowly with a walking stick could possibly have moved quick enough to get behind something to obscure him from my view in such a short time.
In fact, the distance between me and the nearest object was too great for Ben Johnson at his prime to reach before I turned around. It wasn't until I thought about it while walking home that it struck me what it was that was so strange about the gentleman when I first laid eyes on him. Despite being quite persistent, rain and strong wind driving the rain, the man was dry and there were no drops hitting him. He was all dressed in brown shoes, suit, and flat cap. I can't remember the color of his shirt or if he was wearing a tie, but I will never forget his face as he smiled a gentle smile of thanks as he moved out of his way. His features were very clear. I've never seen him since. This village was quite a friendly community where most people knew everyone else, but I did not recognize this gentleman. There were many strange things that happened in the family home, from power cuts that were localized to just our house and the whole street. We had electricity meters that took coins to pay for the electricity supply. If the electricity went out, it should need to be topped up by popping a coin in the slot. Even after putting money in the meter, the electricity would not work. It would be found to have been switched off, and in those days, there were no such things as circuit breakers that would trip the switch. When my father knocked out the dining room window to put in a patio door, we found 3 patio negatives of an old gypsy man. The first of him, out the front of his caravan. Another of him stood on the caravan steps, and the last of him laid out dead. We intended to have them developed. They were missing from the place we put them. We assumed they fell down behind the kitchen cabinet where they were left. When the kitchen was remodeled, there was no signs of them, and other things we assumed had fallen down behind the cabinets. On many occasions, I've told certain people to answer the phone because it was for them, and it was. The problem was the phone had not actually rung until after I had told them, but within a few seconds. I can't explain it, but it still happens. It was in October of 2004, around 3:30 in the morning. I was slowly waking and was in the state where I could hear the TV, but wasn't quite awake. I remember having this eerie, scared feeling, and in my sleep started singing Jesus Loves Me, the old childhood Sunday school song. Anyways, I remember feeling a presence on my legs, real heavy, and I felt something was watching me. I snapped awake and moved, and the thing made a swooshing noise, and my cat even looked up in the air where this went over my head and out the door. I was on the couch and the front door was behind me. My cat was acting funny even before this, and at times I would come home and feel a nervous, scared feeling like someone was in the house. That's when I saw it. It was the silhouette of the Hat Man. I looked petrified, and I couldn't just shake the feeling. It was almost inside my head, like it was screaming voices at me. The voices released from the Hat Man into my head were all mumbled, so I couldn't really understand any of them. A split second later, there is silence, and the Hat Man slowly fades into the abyss, actually fading into the TV screen, once and for all. I don't know if this has anything to do with the paranormal, or if I'm just losing my mind. Was it sleep paralysis? Was the Hat Man real? Or was it just all in my imagination? I have no idea, but I'm kind of hoping and praying to God and Jesus that this doesn't even exist and that I'm all hallucinating this just to make myself feel better. As I previously stated, my cat has even noticed weird things that have occurred in this house, and I'm just not sure what to trust anymore. Are my senses going crazy? Am I just in touch with the paranormal? Am I opening up another portal to the paranormal dimension in which beings and spirits, including the Hat Man, come to greet me with demonic images and voices in my head? I don't know, but I'm just hoping that I will never find out the true answer to this mystery. Thank you so much for reading. I know it's short, but thank you. In my life, my family and I had numerous paranormal incidents. There were always heavy footsteps, sounding like a person in boots upstairs in the attic. Sometimes I heard them coming down the stairs or on the front porch at night, but oftentimes I had trouble keeping them. They said the TV kept going off and on. One said she saw a man in the attic through the window. My boys were afraid to sleep in their room alone sometimes because they saw people in the backyard. There were 2 very strange occurrences that happened in the winter of 1991. I was married at the time to a man who was abusive to my children and myself when he drank. One night, I smelled something burning in the bedroom, and the bed was smoldering. I woke up my husband, and he pulled the mattress off the bed. There was a burning area right in the bottom of the top mattress. He had not been smoking in bed, and wouldn't have been there anyway. Another night, I took the kids to get ice cream. When I got back,
The doors were all deadbolted and windows locked to where I couldn't get in. I looked through a crack in a curtain and saw my husband lying unconscious on the floor, and the heavy dining room table was turned over. The phone was dangling from the wall. I pried open a window and climbed in. I called for an ambulance and called the police. My husband was taken to the hospital, and the police detective was totally baffled. Later, my husband said that he was talking on the phone to his mother when he was hit hard from behind and knocked out. His mother called to check in on what had happened, saying they had been talking, she heard noises, and he was no longer there. I felt like maybe we had a ghost that was protective towards us, but angry with my husband for his actions. I usually felt safe in the house, but on occasions, I was very frightened. After my husband and I divorced, I felt the need to move. While checking out the history of the house later, I found that it was originally owned by a doctor who kept his ill patients in his home with him. This was in the early 1900s, around 1907. After he left, there was a terrible train wreck just outside of town where some Mexican immigrants and a couple of local workers were killed in a train collision. Their bodies were badly burned and thrown into a massive grave, which turned out to be in the back acre of our yard. I feel certain that we had multiple spirits, though before this time, I never believed in ghosts. I was visiting California on a school trip. My friends and I were hanging out in the hotel's hot tub. We were playing Truth or Dare. I was dared to leave the hot tub and dive into the cold pool, then run back to the hot tub. I got out and went to the edge of the pool. Looking at the clear water, I dove in. Next thing I knew, I was face to face with a dead body. He was face down at the bottom of the pool. It was like it was slow motion. He turned to me with his eyes closed. He slowly opened his eyes and stared into my eyes. He was missing his left eye. I was scared. I breathed in to scream and breathed in water. I pushed through the dead man on accident, and in my struggle to get to the top, I was thrashing around quite a bit. A friend came and helped me out. Panting, I said I didn't feel like playing anymore. Me and my two friends went back to our hotel room. One friend was taking a shower, and my other friend was watching TV. We noticed our phone blinking. We checked the messages. We had 362 messages. We were only out for an hour. We had no way to trace the calls. No one even knew our hotel phone number. We listened to the first few messages. They seemed like they were all blank. Finally, we heard something. One word, hell. This freaked me out. I haven't told about the man at the bottom of the pool. I tried to downplay the message. Later that night, we went to sleep. I don't recall any of this next part, but my friend said that at 3 a.m. I got up, turned on the curling iron, and turned on the faucet. I then hit my head really hard on the headboard of the bed and went back to sleep. I woke up that morning with nothing but an eerie feeling, which was soon forgotten since the next day we went to Disneyland. A week later, we drove home. The thought of this man still terrified me. I just pushed it to the back of my mind and continued on. I did not believe he wanted to harm or scare me, though. Weeks went by. I remember doing chores around the house. I was putting laundry away in my mother's room. Her dresser has a huge mirror. After placing the clothes in the drawer, I looked up into the mirror. Standing behind me in the back of the room was this man. I could see him very clearly. He was young, long blondish hair. His skin was grayed and almost green, waterlogged, and a little wet looking. His good eye was brown, and where his other eye should have been was just a hole. It seemed to go on forever. It was almost hypnotizing. I noticed this all in an instant, because when I turned around, this young man turned and walked away. I sensed that his name was William. I didn't see William for a very long time, although I felt him following me. Our house began to change. Radios would turn on when they weren't even plugged in. A music box would start to play randomly. Shelves would fall off the wall. Everyone noticed it. Everyone was afraid. I wasn't. Years went by. I started to feel a difference over me. At night, I would wake up to voices in my room, like a crowded room where you could hear only a few words that made sense. I tried to ignore the voices. Sometimes, I would wake up with a single voice in my ear talking to me. They seemed to never make sense. It was like the end of a sentence or the beginning. I remember waking up one night. I felt scared for the rest of the time. It was very late at night. I knew no one was awake. A blue light was outside my closed door. My door began to shake very violently, but the beads on my door didn't even sway. I kept all of this to myself. Who wanted to tell their friends and family they heard voices in their head and see people in swimming pools? I don't think so. Later that year, I moved out and started going to college. My family said that since I left, the strange happenings seemed to have moved out when I did. Strangely, my roommate said that since I moved in, strange things started happening. Pictures falling off the walls, TVs turning on, shadows, and the feeling of being watched. I still heard voices at night, but never anything scary. I learned to live with it all. Now, in 2009, I'm married. I still hear voices at night, but they're making more sense now. Sometimes the voices say things to me like, "Get out. I'm not kidding. Get out." And laughing followed. Evil laughing. I tried to go back to sleep. One night, a few weeks ago, I woke up feeling like someone was in the room with me. A different energy than my husband's. I looked up and saw a dark figure standing over me. My dog started barking and growling like crazy. The dark figure turned his head and walked out the closed door. I went back to sleep and woke up to a voice telling me, "Your destiny will be at the Valley of Thunder. Then all the voices shall be heard." I haven't ignored that one. Sometimes I will go to Yosemite National Park, Valley of Thunder, and see what my destiny is. It just doesn't seem right yet. 2 nights ago, I had a dream. William came to me. He didn't say anything, but I sensed he was telling me it was okay, not to be afraid of him. I feel as if since I've met William, I've become sensitive to spirits and energies. I've met other spirits beside William. I feel as if now I have the ability to read energies and sense thoughts. I almost regard William as a friend. As an avid EVP researcher and long-haul truck driver, I've had many opportunities to get EVP recordings from all over the country. My research has revealed some startling results lately. On the 20th of January this year, an EVP has attached itself to me somehow. Now, no matter where I am or where I go, this EVP named Desmond Heathers is in every recording I make on my Olympus digital voice recorder. Even when I'm traveling down the road at 65 miles per hour, Desmond is there ready to talk when I turn on my recorder. I know a lot about them and where he is now. One startling development occurred when I asked Desmond if he knew anyone that I knew. He said, "Yes, Joe." I said, "Joe, my brother?" He said, "No, Joe who is with me." I asked him if Joe was with us now, and he said, "He is in you now." So I asked, "Joe, are you there?" And I got this voice in the recording that was very deep and gruff sounding. I can only say it sounded like Mr. T from the TV show The A-Team. Joe said, "Go away, leave me alone." Well, I don't communicate with those who don't want to, so I just do what I always do with the ones I get who I don't think deserve my attention. I just ignore them. Here's where the story takes a strange turn. The week after that, I was talking to my doctor about a fatigue problem I've been having lately. Nothing serious, just tired during the times of the day I don't think I should be. He asked if I was sleeping okay, and I said I tend to wake up several times during the night. He recommended I get a sleep study done. After finding the only sleep research center within 100 miles of where I live, I was told the study would cost in excess of $1,600 for one night. Well, I thought this was ridiculous, so I figured I would do it myself. I was on the road the night I decided to do my sleep study, and set up my digital voice recorder and DV camera on the sleeper of my big rig. I fell asleep within 15 minutes. When I reviewed the recordings the next morning, I was so startled at what I had recorded, I could hardly listen to it. The recording revealed that I snore rather loudly. What was startling, though, was the EVP Joe was using my snoring sound to speak to me in my sleep. With every rattling snore, he formed words. He said things like, "Don't you know you love me? Don't leave me. Don't wake up. I'm not done yet. Don't you remember me from the Navy? You know you're listening to me. You know you love me. How did I get in here? What happened to me? I need you. I'm just jealous of you, Tony. Tony, please, help me." Not just that night either. Every night I've recorded, he's talking to me in my sleep. It concerns me because I don't know if there may be some subliminal influence with him talking in my sleep like that every night. I think I know him. I vaguely recall a friend I had in the Navy named Joe back in 1980. I remember feeling sorry for the guy because of his drinking problem and was always trying to help him when he got in trouble. I used to buy him gifts for his birthday and Christmas because his family wanted nothing to do with him. Other than that, I can't recall very much about him. When I asked him how long he has known Desmond, he said about 5 years. That's how long Desmond told me he's been dead. Actually, Desmond didn't even know he was dead until I convinced him he was. He kept trying to tell me he was alive. So I asked what it looked like where he was, and what did he see around him. He said nothing but a faint amber and turquoise colored light that was all around him. He desperately wants out of there. He says he can see me sometimes. One day, when I was sitting at my office desk at home, I asked him if he could see me, and he said he could. So I reached in my pocket and pulled out a $20 bill and asked if he could see what I had in my hand. He said $1. Thinking it was just a lucky guess on his part, I dropped the bill and picked up a Bic lighter. I then asked again, what am I holding in my hand right now? And he said, a light. I reached in my desk for it and had my hand closed around it so I couldn't even see it. How did he know? Many times Desmond will ask if I can see him. I've never been able to do so I got out my digital camera and asked if he would let me take pictures of him. He said, I will try. I told him where to be in my living room at home while I snapped a few dozen pictures. Nothing showed up on review, so I asked if he would mind trying something else. I explained what white noise was to him, and he was already familiar with it. He helps me to adjust the levels and spectrums of white noise to be able to hear him better. I explained that I could generate a different type of noise that is not audible, but that I might be able to see him with. So I set up my DV camera to form a video feedback loop with my Sony Trinton 32-inch TV, manually adjusting the focus in such a way that the feedback picture was focused on the pixels on the screen, as it oscillated slightly due to some technical reason I can't explain now. After talking with Desmond during the setup and adjustment period, I told him where I thought he could best try to show himself. Desmond appeared to me only once for about 2 seconds in the video. He had very plain symmetrical features and was shown from the waist up. He seemed to be in his mid-30s with dark sunken eyes. He was wearing a bowler hat and a 1940s type jacket with wide rounded lapels with an open shirt that had no collar. Further research with Desmond shows he can see me and some things around me when his energy level is high. For example, I can give him instructions on how to travel somewhere. One time I showed him a map on my Microsoft Streets and Tips and showed him the same roads and satellite photos taken from Google Earth. With this information, I am able to ask him to get a specific place and get information I desire. One time I sent him to the Powerball lottery drawing headquarters located at Urbandale Drive in Urbandale, Iowa to see if he could see the Powerball numbers being drawn 6 hours before the draw. I have reason to believe he is not bound by time as we know it, and thought he could travel through different threads of time and different timelines. Well, I asked him to go and do this one for me, after about an hour of instruction on what to look for and how to get there. Then, when I asked if he was ready, he said, I'll try. Then, I'll be right back. He returned in approximately 30 minutes and gave me some numbers. I was all excited and purchased our ticket. Later the next day, I went to check the ticket and realized I had sent him on the wrong day. I explained to Desmond how sorry I was for the mistake and how much time and energy we wasted. I asked him what the numbers were he gave me because he was there 24 hours too early to see the actual drawing and realized he must have witnessed one of the practice draws they do to check out the machines. Lately, I've been having some other problems. I injured my back seriously at work and have not had the desire to record anymore due to my pain and medication. I've been recovering well and expect my research to continue. My new job doesn't offer me as much travel and time to do the things I'd like. I just hope when I start recording again, Desmond and Joe will let some other people talk to me. I wanted to share my experience with you guys. I'm not sure what it means or anything, but if you do make it to the end of the story, you can decide for yourself and let me know what you think. One night when I was 13, I couldn't sleep, so I tried to turn the other way, on my side, to try to get myself comfy. As I turned around, I saw a figure of a woman against the wall in front of me. She was kind of a black figure, and she seemed to have a hunchback and a hump on her back from the way she was standing. This, of course, freaked me out, especially since I was only 13 at the time. I lay in shock and not knowing what to do, and after like 2 seconds, I put my head under the covers and called for my mom. She came in, and I was really afraid to tell her in case she thought I was crazy, so I just told her that I had a really bad dream. I was definitely not asleep. I couldn't sleep for a few nights as it freaked me out so much. This kind of went away after a few weeks, and I was gradually able to sleep again. However, a few weeks after this had happened, I was getting pains in my back and I went to the doctors to get scans and things. I then found out I had sclerosis, curvature of the spine. I eventually started getting a slight hump in my back because of this. It has been 10 years since I saw this woman, but I can never get it out of my mind. I've since told my mom about this and she seemed freaked out about it as well. I'm not sure what this means, or if it was a ghost or spirit trying to tell me something. I have no idea, but it really did freak me out. This is just a short experience I had at about 17. A group of 4 friends and I were sitting at my house, bored out of our minds. My buddy Joey, not his real name, was literally banging his head against the wall out of boredom. Tommy, also not his real name, was reading a book he brought. His sister Alexis, of course not her real name either, was teasing my dog with a flashlight. Henry had his earbuds blaring. Finally, my friend Annie was on my laptop looking for something that might be fun. Annie came across a story a few guys had posted on a ghost website about an abandoned local farm. They posted how they went exploring the farm and got the hell scared out of them by a black figure. Annie is into the paranormal and asked if we wanted to investigate it. I said sure, better than sitting around waiting for my dog to bite Alexis for teasing him. The others agreed, so we hopped into my truck. It's a single cab with 3 seats. The girls rode in the cab with me, while Henry, Joey, and Tommy rode in the truck bed. I didn't believe in ghosts. If someone told me they saw a ghost, I would have to say stop watching Scooby-Doo and return to reality. Annie told me how to get there with the directions the guys posted on the ghost site. When we arrived, we all hopped out and walked up to the gate. We hopped the gate and started talking about where to go. We agreed to split up. Tommy and Joey were with Alexis. They went to the old barn, while Annie was with Henry and I. We went into the 2-story farmhouse. I looked in the upstairs window. All the glass looked like it had been smashed out of the windows. The house looked wrecked. It looked like whoever lived there had been a hoarder. While Henry and I were exploring, we heard what sounded like footsteps upstairs. We were intrigued, so we took off upstairs. When we got to the 2nd floor, it was empty. While walking down the stairs, I felt like someone had been pushing me. I was mad. My right shoulder was cut thanks to the old wooden steps I had twisted my ankle on. I asked Annie and Henry, "What the hell are you guys trying to do? Are you trying to kill me?" Annie said she and Henry were in the bedroom to the right, looking through some of the old junk when they heard me scream and they came running. Henry held me up and we were about to leave when we heard something slam hard in the kitchen. We went in and saw a toolbox we had seen on the table on the floor with various tools around it. Henry said no way in hell that toolbox had a damn padlock on it. We all looked around the lock. It was on the table now, besides where the toolbox used to be. Henry tried to get in the toolbox earlier, but the lock prevented him. We heard footsteps upstairs again. Annie said screw this and ran outside along Henry while I hobbled out. The jerks left me behind. When we were out of the house, we saw Alexis, Tommy, and Joey. They were panting out of breath and looked terrified. We asked what happened. Alexis said that they saw a black figure with red eyes and it charged at them. We all heard a loud snarl like a big dog, and we took off towards my truck on the way there and said, "Look." In one of the upstairs windows, we saw 2 glowing eyes go from the middle of the window to the top. Then they separated. One went left and one went right. We all hopped the fence and peeled out of there as fast as everyone could.
I'm not currently experiencing any hauntings, but I do have a tale of a spiritual encounter. I will begin by prefecting story with the events leading up to the event. My grandfather passed away in hospice care in July 2000. I spent his last night on Earth with him, holding his hand and reading the Bible to him, which was his favorite literature. He was an artist and a carpenter, and spent his last remaining years up in his home carving beautiful artwork out of wood. He loved his simple life and carved because he wanted to, never once selling his museum quality work. He would only give it away to anyone who truly appreciated it. At 88, he was about 80% deaf and completely blind in one eye, and nearly blind in the other. After a stroke 6 months earlier, his health declined quickly, and he simply gave up on life. As he lay in the bed, I sang to him, although he probably could not hear me or even knew that I was there, and he was in a coma-like state with his eyes open. He had stopped eating, and he was severely underweight, and it was hard for me to see him like that, knowing how much he loved life and living. Many times he cried in his last few years, saying that he loved his life and didn't want to die. During his last living moments with me, I looked down into his distant, foggy eyes, knowing he couldn't hear or see me, and told him that the baby goose that he held at my house the last time he visited had grown up now and had 4 babies of her own. His eyes filled up with tears and turned red, and his mouth began to quiver as if he was trying to say something. He hadn't spoken in nearly 2 weeks. His love for animals and nature transcended through his limitations that night. I knew he would probably die that night, so I sat next to him with my hand on his chest, feeling his every breath and heartbeat. He didn't pass away until the next day, after I left. He was alone, which is what I didn't want. I didn't want his spirit to leave his body and to look down at an empty room. That bothered me for a long time. In an attempt to comfort ourselves, we turned to his Bible. He was much more dedicated to the word than we were ever, but knowing that it was so close to his heart, we thought it would ease our minds. My mother said to read something that he had underlined or highlighted, which is something his Bible was full of. I read the first thing I opened that was underlined. You do not have to understand the Bible to feel the power behind these words, which read, "For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds, to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Where there, comfort one another with these words." We all felt a chill run through us. At his wake, I waited until everyone left, and I cut a small lock of his beautiful, thick white hair and placed it in an envelope. As myself and my friend walked to the vehicle to leave, I opened the door, and a mourning dove flew into me as if trying to enter the truck with me. It injured its wings, and I brought it home. I rescue and rehabilitate small animals all the time, so I mended its wing and let it go about a week later. I took that as a sign from my grandfather, as we had that bond of loving all creatures great and small. A couple of weeks later, in August, my best friend was at my house, and I was showing her videotapes of Papa, that is what I called him, because she had never met him. I wanted to share with her the kind of person he was. For nearly 2 hours we watched him talk about God, Leonardo da Vinci, his childhood, his 24 brothers and sisters, his beloved mother, and we saw him play his guitar and sing old, sad songs about homeless children and hobos, songs that made grown men cry, including himself. After the tape was finished, I got up to go to the kitchen for something to drink, and my friend went to the restroom. At that moment, we both heard a loud musical tone that sounded like a doorbell. Since I do not have a doorbell, we both said, "What the heck is that?" We both re-entered the living room where we had been watching the tape and searched everywhere where the sound had come from. My heart sank as I realized what it was. About 2 years earlier, I had one of those cheap doorbells that you plug into the wall, using a battery-operated button at your front door to operate the sound. I became so irritated by all the neighborhood kids ringing it that I just took the button off and put it in my piano stool. The battery had gone bad anyway. I never unplugged the part that rings. I'd forgotten it was there because it was hidden behind a chair. That was eerie enough, but what really got me thinking was when I explained to my friend that I had the ringer set to only ring one long tone. To change it to the traditional two-tone ding-dong, you had to take the back off of the unit and set the switches according to the manual. Needless to say, it did ring in the ding-dong fashion. Oddly enough, it was my friend who said, "Maybe it was your grandfather saying hi." It hadn't even occurred to me. Shortly after that, I was explaining what happened to my mother on the phone, and it happened again. She could hear it, and we both fell silent. He was letting me know that his fears of leaving his family behind were pointless, and that he was with the rest of his family in heaven. I believe he was thanking me for being there for him when no one else could. It has been 3 years since his own death, and the doorbell has not rang since. Hey, my name is Maddie. Today, me and my best friend Summer had a strange encounter with a malevolent spirit. Let me explain what happened. A few months ago, me and one of my other friends, Alicia, met an 8-year-old spirit named Reese through a Ouija board. She seemed like a very sweet and innocent girl. She told us at her own will, and I repeat her own will, how she met her death. She apparently got beaten to death by her abusive father. Then a few weeks went by, and I introduced Reese to my now best friend Summer. They got along very well. It didn't seem like she had any sorts of problem with her or anyone she met. The next day we were playing when we got a call from my friend Amy. Long story short, she had an encounter with a spirit named Sarah. She claimed that Sarah was a very stubborn spirit. It took her hours just to get her to say goodbye. Amy also stated that Sarah seemed like a very lonely and clingy spirit who did not want to let her go. Then we made an attempt to contact Sarah through the board. It was a success. After we talked to Sarah for a bit, we asked her if she knew Reese. Sarah suddenly stopped moving the planchette. We asked her if she was alright. She answered no. She also said that Reese isn't Reese. She said that Reese is actually a man named Roger. Sarah also told us that Roger was the one who killed her at the age of 27. The final thing she said about Roger was that if we ever told him that she was the one who told, that he would send her straight to the gates of hell. We tried to contact Reese, Roger, on December 10th, 2016, around 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We successfully contacted Reese. At that period of time, he didn't know that we knew who he really was. Then, we did something that we both regret. We asked if she was hiding anything from us. He responded this in his own words. "Fine, you fucking caught me." Then right after that he said, "Who told you two idiots?" We simply responded the internet in hopes to keep Sarah safe. Then Roger responded by saying, "You are a liar." Then the planchette started to circle around the alphabet counterclockwise, excluding the letter M. It did not touch the corners whatsoever. Summer and I started to panic, wondering what it was trying to do. I thought he simply lost control over the planchette, but Summer thought it was something more, because at that time, it was spinning around continuously for about 30 seconds. So I suggested that if we put pressure on it, it might stop it. It just kept going even with pressure, but just slower. But after we lifted the pressure, it continued to spin and got even faster. After a while, it just randomly landed on Dubai. Maybe it just got tired or got sick of us panicking. I really need to know your thoughts on this, and if this occurrence was really legitimately something evil, because I don't know what to explain it for. Thank you for reading. I didn't believe in the Ouija board because they sell them at Toys R Us, so I didn't think they would sell something dangerous to kids and adults. I've read stories about the Ouija board, but I don't know if it's true. People do make up stories, so it's hard to tell if it's true or not. Some people say the Ouija board is just a game. Others say it's not just a game, and some say it's dangerous. I had to find out for myself if the Ouija board is really dangerous. On Sunday, I decided to go to Toys R Us to buy the board. I drove my car in the morning to Toys R Us, and I was just looking around at first for about an hour. After looking around, I went to the game section and I purchased the Ouija board. I drove back to my apartment and put the board in the closet. The same day, about 10 p.m., I decided to try it out. I took it out of the box and put it on my bed. I didn't have any candles, so I just dimmed the light. I put the board on my lap and the planchet on the board. I put my fingers on the planchet and I started to round in circles for about a minute. I stopped and I started saying, "Is anybody out there?" I kept saying it for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then, all of a sudden, I felt a strange presence right above me. I was so scared that I ran out of my room, and I threw the board in the garbage. I was very shaken. I went back to my room and turned the lights on, and I didn't sleep at all. And that's why I don't mess with Ouija boards. I have had several experiences, but I will tell you two of my most frightening. A friend and I had started playing with the Ouija board, and it ended up turning our lives upside down for the span of around 2 years. One night, my friend Judy, her husband Luke, Loma, and myself were watching a movie called Witchboard right in the middle of a winter storm. All footprints had been covered at this time, and the streets were empty. About halfway through the movie, the front door blew open, and we heard running footsteps come into the house, up the stairs, down the hall, and into the bedroom where Judy's 2-year-old lay sleeping. We were all just sitting there frozen in shock and fright when we heard a loud slam, which turned out to be the bedroom door, and the poor little boy started screaming, "Monster, monster." Luke took off up the stairs, only to find a very upset little boy, and nothing or no one else. As things started to calm down, Judy and I went to shut the front door, and there were still no footprints in the snow. The only snow that had come into the house was blowing from the wind. It was around March now, and one day, as I laid down for a nap, I felt the bed start to shake under me. I was uncertain if I had really felt what I thought I had, so I was not frightened, but I got up anyway. That was only the beginning. Not long after that, it became a constant thing every time I tried to lay in my bed. The shaking started to get more violent, and it also felt as if someone was punching up at the mattress from beneath. I complained several times, and no one believed me. It was now to the point where I was afraid to go to bed. I began sleeping at my friend Loma's house because her bed didn't shake. After staying at her house for 2 weeks, my mom said it was time to come home, and I did agree, but not until she promised to spend the first night sleeping in bed with me. That night, we had only been in bed for about 10 minutes before the bed started its usual shaking. It was very minor at first, so my mom started to make excuses for why it was happening. By the time 5 minutes had passed, it was now undeniable, and I could tell my mother was getting scared, but was trying to stay calm for my sake. The last straw for my mother was when the punching started. It was harder than I had ever felt before. We laid there for a moment while my mother mustered up the courage to peek under the bed. Of course, she didn't find anything, and we promptly left the room and set ourselves up in the living room for the remainder of the night. My bed continued to shake and punch for some time thereafter, but it eventually quit. However, once in a while it will start, to this day, and I just get up or ignore it, and it stops. This encounter involved a Ouija board, and possibly my guardian angel. Years ago, a friend and I were goofing around with a Ouija board. Being a bit ignorant of the unknown, I mistakenly asked it how old I would be when I died and how. It replied that I would be 16 and that I would die in a car accident. A month or two after I turned 16, I was asked if I wanted to go out with my parents the next day to run errands. I said yes. That next morning, I woke up to discover that my parents left without me. I was annoyed. An hour after I woke up, my mother called me from the hospital. They had been hit by a transport truck an hour before. When I asked why they had left without me, my mom replied that her and my dad had tried for a half hour to get me up, and then they gave up. What makes it so scary is where the truck had hit. My one brother has to sit behind my mom, and my dad does not wear a seatbelt. Had I been in that car, I would have been sitting behind my dad with the seatbelt on. The transport truck hit the car on the driver's side, almost imploding on the driver's and left backseat side. That's where I would have been sitting. Guardian angel? I think so. I was celebrating Halloween around my best mate Felicity's house. We usually have a laugh and a joke, but neither of us had played with a Ouija board before, so we gathered about 7 friends from the neighborhood. First, we lit candles, 1 black, 1 red, 1 green, and 1 clear. Fliss had purchased the board from an old shop in the Stoke Town Center. We sat down in her dining room and placed the board right in the middle of the dining room table. We all placed our fingers on the gold planchet. I was the reader, so I asked the questions. At first, we did not get any response, so we all giggled and made fun of the silly people who got themselves worked up about these silly boards. About 5 seconds after we stopped giggling, we heard a massive bang on the floor. I thought it was one of the boys playing a trick, so I suggested that we all sit legs crossed on the chairs. I made sure we were all cross-legged, and I said, "If it was a ghost that made the bang on the floor, can you please do it again?" And it did. I spoke again. We will now try to communicate using the board. So we started to use the board again, and I again asked if anybody was present who wanted to communicate with us. The planchet moved to yes. I asked for a name, and it replied, "I am unclean." Fliss's uncle had passed on, so I inquired if we were talking with her uncle Ian. The response was no. Again, the planchet moved to the following letters, "I am unclean." We had made contact with an apparent demon. We decided to say sorry for disturbing, and we thanked the spirit for its presence. However, it did not go. The spirit of demon flung Fliss back into the wall. Then it came for me. I had a vision of hell itself at that moment, and I remain grateful to this day that it did not hurt me. In telling the story, let me assure the reader that it was passed to me by my grandmother, Eileen. Eileen is in failing health, but her memory is untouched, and her ability to spin a tale is uncanny. This particular story is about her father, Joe, his first wife, and a house that will never be forgotten. My grandmother is a devout Christian, but she believes these tales of the unexplained to be completely true. Judge for yourself. In the late 1800s to early 1900s, it was common practice in the coal fields of Kentucky and West Virginia for a miner to spend the majority of the week at the mines while leaving his wife at home alone. This is exactly what Joe, my great-grandfather, did during his first marriage. After a hasty marriage, Joe bought a small, quaint home for himself and his new wife, Sue. Sue quickly alerted her husband to a potential problem. The house was directly across the road from the local cemetery. Joe, being a firm disbeliever in such superstitious nonsense like ghosts and spooks, had a good laugh when Sue begged him not to make her stay alone in a house so close to a graveyard and told her to get used to it. When Monday morning arrived, he left her alone and laughed as she sobbed on the porch. That night, after completing her tours, she settled down in the bed for a good night's rest and doused the lamps. As soon as she had climbed into bed, a strange noise became apparent outside. As she pulled the covers up around her head, She could hear something like barrels rolling or horses galloping around the house. She tried to sleep and eventually, as the sunrise drove the mysterious sounds away, found some comforting slumber. Every night, the noises started getting louder and louder, seeming to get closer to the house, and, on Friday night, Sue heard 3 knocks on the door. In a terrified fit, she screamed, "Leave me alone," and suddenly, the noises faded. The next morning brought Joe's return, and the first thing Sue did was beg him to let her leave the house, telling him of the haunted noises. He laughed unsympathetically and told her to get over this stupidity. In desperation, she bitterly screamed, "Joe, I hope to God it gets you." Joe wasn't the least bit frightened and told her that it was Cheryl's local men playing tricks on her. Later that night, Sue slept well in Joe's arms, but some subtle suspicion began to eat at the unbeliever. As he drifted into a shallow sleep, he was startled at a loud crack coming from the fireplace that startled him, and as he sat upright in the bed, he saw the apparition of an elderly woman staring at him from the rocking chair at the foot of the bed. My grandmother says that Joe knew exactly who the woman was, but he took the knowledge of her identity to his grave because simply, she had been dead for 6 months before they moved into the house. Joe shuddered with fear and her bony, cold hand stretched to clutch his ankles as she latched onto his foot and began pulling him towards her and the footboard of the bed. Joe fainted with fright as he felt his foot slide down to the foot of the bed in the dead hand of the spirit. The next morning, Sue roused her pale husband and sat up in the bed as he opened his eyes and screamed with terror. The footbed of the bed was broken and the rocking chair had been toppled during the night. Joe immediately promised his frightened wife that not another night would be passed in this restless house, simply telling her, "Sue, whatever it was, it got me." Thank you for reading my grandmother's story. I hope you found it entertaining because, well, I thought it was pretty frightening. See you later. I have told this story to people who are not there to witness the actual event, and some look at me as if I am just telling a story to get a good laugh, but I find nothing funny about it. Everything I'm about to relate is true, and I guess in some bizarre way, I feel that by retelling this story to anyone who is willing to listen to it will bring me some comfort. On July 6, 1990, a high school friend shot himself in the head with a rifle in a nearby local baseball dugout. The act shocked and saddened everyone, especially his parents, of course, who did not want to believe their only son would take his own life. The days that followed his death were happening, for me, as if in a dream. Fearing this act would spark some sort of chain reaction, school's counselors were sent in to help the students grieve and discuss their feelings of loss. Days went by, and there seemed to be a cloud of despair and confusion hanging over our entire high school class. If he had lived, my friend would have graduated from high school with the rest of us that same year. When he died, he was 2 months away from his 18th birthday. About a week after his suicide, I was visiting my best friend at the time, we'll call her Anne, in her home. We were both still very affected by the death of our friend, and we began to talk late into the night about his possible reasons for taking his own life and how crazy and unexpected it was. We had been discussing the whole chain of events and basically trying to make sense of something we couldn't even imagine when I suddenly became very uncomfortable talking about our deceased friend. I was sitting at the time in a desk chair across from Anne, who was sitting comfortably on her bed facing me. She was looking directly at me, and she could see the discomfort on my face. She assumed I was just overreacting, and our discussion had gotten to me, so she stood up and moved towards the door of her bedroom and gestured in a sweeping motion with her arm for me to follow her into the kitchen down the hall. There was a single small desk light on behind me when she made this motion with her arm, so that when she moved, her body created a shadow on the wall. This is going to sound ridiculous, and I'm no physics expert, but when Anne swept her arm up into the air, gesturing me to follow her, her shadow did not follow her arm. Instead, there was a strange kind of delay, and I saw her arm move, and about 5 to 10 seconds later, the shadow of an arm moved, mimicking the same gesture she had just made. I, of course, thought my eyes were playing tricks on me and ignored the shadow, and I would have kept it to myself if only Anne had not turned to me and asked, "Did you just see that?" I answered yes, of course, and we fled out of the room and into the kitchen.
Anne's house was large, and our frightened voices bounced off the columned walls, but nothing ever occurred after that. My friend Anne and I no longer speak, and I'm sure that if she knew I was relaying this story to strangers, she would think I was crazy, but I remember the death of her high school friend as if it were yesterday, and I can't help wishing that the shadow we saw was indeed a sign from our friend, but I will never be too sure. I write this story in his memory, and in the hope that he is in a place where his problems have been all taken away. Thanks for reading. This story I'm about to tell you has been talked about in my family for years. Now it has been passed down to my own daughter, who tells it to her friends at slumber parties. It begins with the first time I ever saw anything, when I was around the age of 7. It happened in a house that we lived in years ago in western New York. I shared a room with my sister. We both had the feeling something was always watching us, but being so young, we never really worried all that much about it, until one night, while I was trying to sleep. My bed was up against one wall, and my sister's bed faced the other. I turned, so I was facing the wall. When I opened my eyes, after getting that feeling of being watched again, there, standing in the wall, was a woman. She was a young woman, dressed all in black, high white lace collar, wearing a cameo, and hair pulled up neatly in a bun. She stood there with her hands folded in front of her, smiling sweetly at me. Now mind you, I was 7 years old, so I pulled the covers up over my head and then down again to take a peek just to see if she was still there, which she was, and this time with a bigger smile. I got so scared I jumped from my bed and ran across the room to my sister's bed. I landed right on top of her, waking her up, of course. I told her there was a lady in my wall, but when we looked again, the woman was gone. The next day I told my mom about it. She said it must have been just my guardian angel and left it at that. She refused to talk about it any further, or even years later. Then recently, my brother and I got to talking about that house. He said, "Don't you remember what the neighborhood kids used to say about our house?" And of course, I didn't remember a thing. He told me that apparently a couple had died there years ago. Then he asked me if I remembered the time that he and I were in the backyard and we saw the old man in the attic window. And all of a sudden it rushed back. Bam. Right when he told me about the old man in the attic window, I had a major flashback and remembered it like it was yesterday. I don't even have to tell you, even after all these years, it scared me. Well, many years have passed since we lived there, but I still have dreams about that house, and I wish the dreams would stop. I have many other scary stories to tell, but I freaked myself out telling this one, so the others will have to wait. This incident happened about 2 years ago. I was 17 at the time, working at a restaurant motel in Old Saybrook, Connecticut called The Castle. The scariest thing about this place, besides the low pay, was the old story of what happened to one of its original owners. From almost my first day working there, I was told that one of the members of the family who built the house had killed himself on the grounds. The story was that one night, the son had discovered that his fiancée was cheating on him with one of his close friends. Deep in depression, the son climbed to the tallest tower of the castle, tied a rope to some type of pole on the roof, and hanged himself. The next morning, as the parents were leaving the home, they saw him hanging. They immediately sold the mansion, and it has been a hotel ever since. Many employees said that they had heard and seen things, yet I, as most people believe at first, didn't believe the stories. That is, until one night, I was working a late shift with a friend of mine named Katie. We were cleaning up the dining room after closing when we heard the kitchen door slam shut. I had popped them open, but as the wind off Long Island Sound is pretty strong, I figured they had been blown shut. Katie yelled at me to get over there and look at the kitchen. When I arrived, I saw a weird green light pouring through the round window of the door and flooding out the crack at the bottom. Still unconvinced of any supernatural going-ons, I tried to open the door, but it was not happening. I thought someone was in there, and I knew if the place got trashed, I would get fired, so I reared back and tried to put my shoulder through the door. At the time, I was about 6'2", 200 pounds, played football and lifted a lot of weights. The door should have popped right open, but not this time. Katie and I peered into the window, and there, plain as day, was a man dressed in antique clothes with a noose around his neck looking right back at us. He walked by and the green light left us. We instantly figured, forget the boss, it's quitting time. We ran outside and could barely light our cigarettes. Our hands were shaking so badly. From then on, I was a believer, and I knew I would never, ever doubt ghosts ever again. My aunt and uncle had a passion for restoring old country houses, the last of which had been at an end at the turn of the century. The house sits on 50 acres at the top of a hill, next to a historic old church with an equally historic old graveyard. I can't claim to recall for certain, but I think the church was used as a field hospital during the Civil War. My uncle would tell us the stories about the months after they moved into the house. Their bedroom was on the second of 3 floors, near the large, almost spiral staircase that emptied into the foyer to 2 sitting areas. Late in the evening, while they were in bed, my aunt and uncle would hear what sounded like a distant crowd of people in conversation. Living in quiet country houses most of their lives made them fairly light sleepers. The local volunteer fire department changed that over time. I'll get to that. My uncle would get up to check out the noise and find nothing, but since it was an old house with a boiler, and that it was more or less near town, there were many possible rational explanations for the noise. Still, over the course of a few months, the noises grew louder and louder until it sounded like a party was being thrown in their own house, and my aunt and uncle weren't invited. This had grown so gradually that my uncle was much more annoyed than fearful. One night, he went to the stairs and shouted for them to shut up so we can get some sleep. That seemed to scale back the noise enough to satisfy him, although it didn't go away completely. The next weekend, he took a walk for the first time through the local graveyard and noticed many of the stones were overturned and some of the plots were neglected. He righted the headstones and cleaned up some of the plots that weekend and never again heard the noises in the house. My uncle passed away in that house 1 year ago this October. Subsequently, I spent a great deal more time there last winter than I had before taking care of a few things for my aunt. I slept on the top floor across from the game room. Many nights an air raid siren would go off, summoning the local volunteer firefighters to the station house. I never did get used to sleeping through that. Then one night, the siren wailed at about 2 a.m., and I was having a hard time going back to sleep. I was wide awake when I heard something. It lasted only an instant and seemed to me to be a crowd in the distance that had just been told the punchline to a very funny joke. Whatever it was, it reminded me of one of my uncle's stories. As an epilogue, I should mention that my aunt is trying to sell the house. So far, the most likely buyer is the local funeral home. While sitting around looking at photo albums with my grandmother, we came across some newspaper clippings. The clippings were from a newspaper in Indiana. They were about an old brick house being torn down. Since we live in Mississippi, I found it strange that my grandmother would have these clippings, so I questioned her about them. She then told me one of the eeriest stories I have ever heard. In 1946, my grandmother lived in Mobile, Indiana, with her husband and their child. They lived in an old brick house that was built before the Civil War and stood on the outskirts of town. It was a large house with very high ceilings and wooden floors. In the master bedroom was a closet with a heavy wooden door that did not have a knob, only a wooden latch to keep the door closed. My grandmother would shut and latch the closet. When she would leave the room and return, the closet door would be standing wide open. She would shut the door again and go about her chores. When she returned, the door would be open. She did this several times a day. She said the door stayed open more than she could keep it closed. She was more annoyed than scared by this strange event. About 8 months later, she and her husband divorced and she moved to Mississippi with my grandfather. The house she had lived in did not cross her mind until 10 years later when her Aunt Bonnie wrote her a letter and sent her the newspaper clippings. The clippings talked about her old house and reported that it had been torn down. While they were tearing down the house, a hole was discovered under the closet floor. They had found the remains of a man in the hole. It was believed to be the body of a soldier from the Civil War. After lurking around here for ages reading everyone else's story, I finally got up the nerve to post one of my own.
My story isn't as dramatic or interesting as some of the other stories posted here, but I feel confident enough to post it because 3 other people have had experience in this particular house, so here it goes. This happened a few months ago while I was visiting a friend's house one evening. I'll refer to my friend as G. A mutual friend of ours, J, was also present. This was my first and only visit to the house, and no one else was home at the time apart from the 3 of us. The house in question is an old wood villa, which would be, at a guess, 80 to 100 years old. It's a rather large one-level structure with 2 long and connected hallways, one that leads from the front door to the back of the house and another that spans across the back of the house. Together, the hallways form the shape of a T. While eating dinner in the kitchen, dining room area located in the back portion of the house, something drew my attention to the right, so I glanced down to the top section of the hallway. As I watched, a dark shadow moved across very quickly from right to left, as though it just moved up the other long hall, through the center of the house, then straight ahead crossing the top hallway. I didn't say anything at the time, although I was curious about what I had seen. I have to say that while I definitely believe in ghosts, I didn't want to get too excited about something which could have a very logical explanation for. After dinner, G invited us on a tour of the house, and while exploring the rooms off the back hallway, I carefully checked to see if there were any windows that could have let car headlights in to cause the shadow I'd seen, but I couldn't find anything to explain it. Sometime later, G left the lounge to make coffee and, while she was out of the room, I whispered to J that I had seen a shadow cross the back hall. She surprised me by telling me that she too had seen a ghost moving from right to left in the same exact place, only she's seen it twice before in broad daylight. We were intrigued and quite excited about this, but didn't say anything to G as we didn't want to frighten her. Interestingly enough, G approached J recently to ask her opinion about ghosts because a young woman who also lives in the house claimed to see a shadow move up the hallway. She was concerned because she too would be spending several weeks alone there, and understandably, she was frightened. G explained that while she hadn't seen anything herself, there was one occasion when she was walking up the hallway and she felt like she accidentally pushed someone out of the way, even though she couldn't see anyone there. I've been in various places before where I've been able to sense unseen presences. I've had one experience where I used to get a feeling of overwhelming fear every time I went into one particular room in a house my parents owned. With the shadow that Jay and I saw, we didn't feel any strong feelings or emotions connected with it. At this moment in time, I haven't heard any more events in that house. When I was about 12 years old, my brother, sister, and I moved into my grandparents' house. Ever since we could remember, we heard stories about the house being haunted. Nothing too big, but strange things happened a lot. Rumor had it that there used to be a horse track room stable where my grandparents built their house, and a little boy had been trampled in there. We have never actually checked into this story, but it is what we heard. At least it is what we were told. Anyway, all of us grandkids were petrified of going upstairs. It was always so cold up there and just freaky, but that was where all the bedrooms were, so when we moved in, we had no choice. Actually, I had no choice. My little brother and sister had beds set up downstairs and I slept upstairs. When I was about 4, I'd taken up smoking cigarettes, but no one knew about it. I used to turn off my bedroom light and smoke cigarettes. I turned off my light just in case my grandparents happened to come up the stairs. They always turned on the hall light to help their way up the stairs. This way, I would know how to put out my cigarette and spray air freshener. One night, I was upstairs alone smoking when I heard someone coming up the stairs. It was late and everyone had been in bed. The hallway light never came on, but all the same time, I butted out my cigarette and waited, but no one ever came up. This happened quite a few times, and I just got used to it. This house is about 50 or 60 years old. The doors are the old latch type and made of nothing but wood. They are solid. To close the door, you have to lift the hook and latch it onto the other part of the door. To open the door, you have to lift the handle and pull the door open. On my bedroom door, I also had an eye hook lock to keep my room locked and my little brother out. I would be laying in bed at night watching TV and my bedroom door would just pop open, but it would never open all the way because of the lock on my door. I never thought anything of it.
I just thought it was a breeze until my brother and I started sharing stories about what was happening in that room in the house. I've since moved out and my brother moved into my old room. We have all grown up and started sleeping upstairs, and we have gotten over our fears pretty much. There were 4 bedrooms upstairs and they were set up weird. The house was square, 2 bedrooms on each side of the house with a staircase up the middle. To get to the 2 rooms, you have to walk through the main 2 ones. When my little sister finally decided to move upstairs, she moved into the room behind mine. She swears to hearing a little boy crying in her room at night. Recently I bought a Ouija board and have been using it at my new house. One night my cousin, brother, sister, and boyfriend were using it when my cousin and I started talking about how we used to use the board when we were younger at my grandparents' house. My cousin remembers talking to a little boy who died at this location, and she remembers the little boy telling us his vision of the story of what happened to him. He told us his name was Brandon, and his father beat him in the tack room, and that unlike the story being passed around, he hadn't been trampled at all. Which story is true, I don't know, and I guess we'll never know. My little brother is the only one of us left living with my grandparents, and he is now living in my old bedroom. He has heard the footsteps coming up the stairs when he was doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. He has heard whimpering, and he has talked to this little boy. Not literally talking, but questions will pop into his head that he already knows the answers to, like, what year is it? And he will answer out loud. He will not even be thinking about a certain thing, and then all of a sudden, he'll have a question. The door pops open on him, but he doesn't have the latch, so it pops open and closes again. Now, here's the last we have heard from the spirits in our grandparents' house. He was sitting in his room talking to his girlfriend on the phone when he heard someone coming up the stairs. The footsteps stopped at the top of the stairs. He hung up with his girlfriend and went into the hallway, but nobody was there. Now, what happens next makes us believe that the little boy was beaten to death and not trampled as everyone had been told. The footsteps were heavy ones, definitely not of those of a child. When my brother realized no one was there, he just assumed that it was the father because of the heavy footsteps. He told the father that if he didn't leave Brandon, the little boy, alone, that he was going to kill himself and haunt his butt down. He would then beat him to a fine pulp, then come back to life, yeah right, dig up his grave and burn his mangy hide. My brother has become attached to Brandon and has not heard anything from him about his father or heard his father around the house.
I'm here to tell you about the strange occurrences that happened to my mother at the Lawrence family mansion on Teddington Park Avenue in Toronto. The first thing you need to know is that my mom is a down-to-earth, no-nonsense type, and she believes that the house was, as all its tenants have believed in the past, that it is haunted. My mom lived in an apartment, dirt cheap because it was haunted, at the top of the mansion. It was, she says, extremely beautiful. High vaulted ceilings, many rooms, and spacious too. In the kitchen, there was a mirror called the talking mirror. This was because anybody who stayed in the kitchen long enough started randomly talking to themselves in the mirror. My mother says no matter who passed it, they started to babble. My mom even talked to herself without realizing it, until something brought her attention back to where she was and what she was doing, making her realize that she had been talking to herself. On the bottom floor, a German man named Hans, I don't know how to spell it, he was the most serious man my mom had ever known. My mom visited him sometimes, and oftentimes she would go into this bathroom that was there and just study the CLW footed tub that dated back to the 1930s. She got the most creepy feeling looking at it, like she could almost see a body lying in it. She compared it to the Portrait of Murder of Merit, which is a painting of a man with his throat and wrist slit. She told the man, and he said that he heard noises coming from it at night, and that he knew it must have been haunted, because he said you could almost see the outline of a body in it. They looked into the history of the home, and sure enough, somebody had hurt themselves in the tub around the 1950s. Another thing near the bathroom was a hall, or people would say they felt a deep desire to run to get down it, and that before going down it, you had to stop and brace yourself, getting up your courage, like there was a wall there stopping you from going that you had to get through. Another place in the house was a great living room. It was in the apartment of a policeman and his girlfriend. They always argued, mostly in that room. And one night, the girlfriend took the man's gun and held it to his head as they argued. People always reported that happy couples would always go into that room and just start arguing. Cold spots were numerous in the house. I could tell you many other stories about various spots, but I have to get going. My mom says the house is sold for over $5 million, and that she suspects that someone tore the house down to get rid of the hauntings and built a replica. My name is Lindsay. I've lived with my family in this home for 4 years now, and ever since we've lived here, we've experienced some things. It seems though that most things have happened in my bedroom, and I often thought my parents did not believe the things I had told them about. The first month of living in my home, my mother awoke in the morning to find a painting of a woman. This painting was lying on the floor in the closet. It appeared overnight. She had questioned all of us in the home, and nobody had seen it before. The music boxes would play randomly in the middle of the night. Doorknobs, turning seconds before turning them yourself. My bedroom door always sounded like it was opening by itself, when it was really shut. It wasn't for a while when I actually started to see people, or should I say ghosts, in my room while I was sleeping. I have seen a translucent woman wearing brown rags several times. The first I'd ever seen her, she was standing at the foot of my bed with her mouth wide open, as if she was screaming, but I never heard a sound. It felt as though my heart had stopped. I was frozen with fear. I had rolled over and told myself it wasn't actually there, and that I was seeing things. Then about a month later, the same lady sat in my chair, in my room, just watching me. I then covered my face with my pillow and went back to sleep. In the morning, I told my mother about both times this lady being in my room, and she just mocked me. She just kind of laughed and joked about it. She told me that the first time that the lady was there, it was because her teeth hurt, because I'm planning on becoming a dentist after schooling. I didn't think my mom believed me at all. Sometime after that, a tall man stood next to the head of my bed, once again, just staring at me. When I awoke, I started screaming, and my mother came running into my room. She told me it was just a dream and to go back to bed, but I knew it wasn't. She was just saying what parents would say, just to make me feel better. It was strange how my room was the only room I'd ever seen them in. My family would just make fun of me and would make stupid jokes about the ghost in my room. Later one night, my sister was across the hall from me sleeping when she woke to a flash that lit up the room at 1 a.m. This was when she was 20. She then ran into my room and slept next to me. She was not sure that it was a flash from a camera, since we were upstairs and everyone was sleeping. We never figured what the flash was. When my mother was away on vacation, and I was the only one home, I was sleeping, and when I woke in the middle of the night, I found myself eye to eye with a young girl who had to have been at least 10. She had a wound in her head where I had been. Terrifyingly, there was a hole through her head. It was the right eye that had been gone. This was the most frightening thing I'd ever seen. I once again couldn't do anything. I was the only one home, so I laid there and went back to sleep. Once again, I see the woman lady, except this time, I find myself fighting her in my dream. The weird thing was, a mobile that was hanging above me on my ceiling had fallen and hit me in the stomach while I was sleeping. I still found that my parents didn't believe me until one night, my dad went downstairs for a drink at 1 a.m. That's when he heard some girl humming a song. He thought it was me, until he realized that he and my mom were the only ones home that night. Later the same night at 3 a.m, my mother awoke and had to use the restroom. While she was walking down the hall, she heard a lady talking. My parents told me about this when I arrived home the next morning, and now they believe me. We don't know about who these ghosts are, but we are trying to find some history about our house, as it was built in 1890. Maybe the history will reveal who these ghosts are, and why they are there. I grew up in a typical Maryberry-ish small southern town in southeast Tennessee. Our home was less than 80 feet from the Norfolk Southern Railroad line. The tracks were on a rise in the hill, and from the second-story window of our home, you would be parallel with the tracks. The town I grew up in was once a coal mining camp, and then grew to be a coal mining town. Point of fact, the town's name came from the original proprietor of the first train depot. It was called Daisy, after his only daughter. From my house, the original train depot was situated just about a mile north, and the area of the train tracks in between was often referred to as Black Track because there were several curves in the railway, and coal was often spilled in these curves, leaving the soil covered in the black, chalky coal residue. It is purportedly haunted, and there are several ghastly and ghostly tales attributed to that area of track. From what I'm able to gather, one story is that a female slave was once accused of leading other slaves to freedom via the train tracks, and when her trajectory was discovered by her owner, she was tied to the tracks until a train came through, chopping off both of her feet. Once this was done, she was carried to the slave quarters as an example of what would happen to all others who attempted escape, or assisted others in escaping. Slowly she bled to death, despite the other slaves' best effort. I know several people have laid their hands on the Bible today, and testify seeing her feetless body in the area. Other stories about a train wreck that happened about 15 yards from the back door of my old home. In southern Tennessee, we do not get much snow, but we can get quite a bit of rain. Apparently in the late 30s, a weather front came through, bringing a lot of rain and flash flooding to the area. One night after the rain had slowed to a drizzle, a fully loaded train was slowing to stop at the depot, not knowing that the ground below was giving way under its weight. During the initial wreck, several railroad workers and hobos were trapped in the rubble. Many of the rescuers were local farmers and residents who perished as the mud shifted under the weight of the debris, and ultimately, a large landed debris slide halted all rescue efforts. As many as 50 people perished, and the old-timers would say that they could hear people moaning and screaming for help for days after the wreck, and how help never came. Some people swear that they could hear the sorrowful screams and moans of the trapped on bright, still nights. Lastly, another story about the area tracks has to do with teenage hormones and stupidity. Along the section of track is an old paved road that weaves back and forth across the tracks. In the 50s and 60s, this area of road was used by teenagers to prove the muscle in their machines and the guts in their drivers. More than one person has perished in their efforts to outrun the train. Many people say that those untimely deaths are the culprits of strange flashes of light that are often seen in that area. I am new to this site, and I've read many of the stories posted. I wanted to share my experiences. For the past 5 years, myself, my son who is turning 6, and my daughter who will be 2 this fall, lived in a small cottage-style house with a full basement. The first weekend that I moved in, I of course had a party. My son stayed with my parents for the night. I also had a roommate for the first 2 months that I moved into the home. She had a cordless phone in the basement, and I had a regular phone upstairs. After our guests left for the evening, I took the cordless phone upstairs to make some calls. When I went to bed, I left the phone on the floor in my room. The next morning, I heard someone walking up the basement stairs. My bed was on the other side of the wall that led to the basement. I heard the footsteps walk through the kitchen, small dining room, and into the living room. I had my bedroom door shut, and I tried to call out to my roommate to tell her to come in. I thought that she was looking for the phone. It was then that I realized that I couldn't open my eyes, move, or even speak. I heard the footsteps pass through my doorway. The door never opened. I noticed that the closer they got to my bed, that the floor appeared to be shaking, hence the shaking ghost. The only auditory comparison I can give is it sounded like when my dad would do laundry and try to cram 20 pairs of jeans in a washer that had 5. The whole machine would shake, and you could hear it all over the house. The bathroom floor would even vibrate. That is what it felt like to me. I realized that whatever it was standing over me, and soon I felt a hand resting on my hip. It was just a gentle pressure. I think that he was trying to see who was in the house. At that moment, I was extremely terrified and still couldn't move, speak, or even open my eyes. There was a banging on my window. The noise stopped, and whatever had touched me let go. I jumped out of bed, and there was nothing in the room. Apparently, my dad had been standing outside for 10 minutes banging on the door. I never heard him pull into the driveway, which is right outside my window, or knock on the door. He also said that he tried to call us, and I'd never heard the phone ring. I never had this happen again, until just 2 nights ago. My daughter and I share a room, and around 2 in the morning, she woke up. I could hear her cry out, "Mama," and I tried to get up. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move anything but to lift my head off the pillow briefly. I realized that the floor was shaking again. I tried to open my eyes to look at it, and I couldn't. I believed that it was looking to the crib at my daughter. I didn't feel anything evil, but I don't think it wanted me to see it. After about 5 minutes, the shaking stopped, and my daughter was back asleep. It all happened so strange that I even considered that I was maybe dreaming it all. When I checked the crib, my daughter seemed fine, and nothing was out of place. Some other just normal haunting things I've experienced are footsteps in cabinets open when I know that I'd left them closed. The ghost seems to like my kids, and likes to check up on them. I smoke, so during the winter when it is cold, I go down into the basement and smoke by the back cellar steps. I have often heard footsteps go from one bedroom to another, but they never go back out of the last room they entered. Also, when my daughter was in her baby swing, Anytime I went downstairs, I would hear footsteps walk over to the swing and stop. They are always too heavy and slow to be my son's. Also, whenever I hear them and go back upstairs, he is soundly asleep in his room, so I know that it was never my son. There have been a few times, though, that I felt that I was unwelcome in the basement. I feel like I'm being watched in there, and that something doesn't like me to be there. I have also felt that feeling walking past my kitchen at night. It's like something is standing there watching me, and this thing seems very cold. I have never been harmed or felt completely threatened by anything. My son has complained of being scared, but if he has seen or heard anything, he doesn't tell me. I just wanted to share my story. We are moving in a month, so it'll be interesting to see if the people that end up renting my house have any experiences too. When I was about 6 or 7, I woke up in the middle of the night for a strange reason. I had a loft bed, and I had looked down in my closet. As I was looking, I saw my bead curtains that were hanging over my closet starting to sway. I then felt something brush the side of my arm. I flipped out and almost ran into my parents' room. About halfway to my parents' room, I came to the realization that maybe my fan was on. When I went back to my room, I noticed that my fan had been unplugged the whole time. I knew that my curtains were definitely moving on their own. I didn't even own any pets, so I had no logical explanation for what had happened. I remember always seeing someone in the corner of my eye. I would turn to see who it was, but when I did, no one was there. Things would disappear, such as homework and school supplies. Then they would reappear on the kitchen counter and on my dresser. I would always feel someone is watching me. Then I turned around to see that no one was there. I remember one time in particular, I had a friend sleep over. We were up in my tree fort, and it was dark out, and we were hiding inside. We had dared each other to turn off our flashlights so that it was pitch black. We were getting ready to open the side door when a pair of red eyes appeared on the door window. We rushed inside and started to shake from fright. I have moved from that house 5 weeks ago, and I've lived in that house for 7 years. I'm glad not to be in that house anymore. I feel a presence here, but I don't know if it's good or bad. Thank you so much for tuning in. Like I said, I know you guys like the longer videos, and I feel like that's, I'm trying to roll out as many longer videos as possible, so I figured this would be a good idea to do it. According to my analytics, you guys love it, so that's all I really gotta say. So please give this video a share, a like, a comment, and a subscribe, because we're getting so close to 32,000. I'm about 100 away, so if you really like these stories, if you really want to, listen to true scary stories, whether they're ghost stories, then click the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the alternate universe that is... Okay, I'm cringy. I gotta go, guys. Love you, bye.